I'd like to call this special school board meeting of the Folsom Cordova Unified School District Board of Education to order. Mr. Hoover, if you'd be so kind to lead us in the pledge.
My pleasure. Ready? Salute. I pledge allegiance to the United States
of the United
States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Grab my seat here. All right. Good evening, everyone. A broadcast and recording are being made at the discretion of the board, and the broadcast may capture images and sounds of those attending the meeting. In response to COVID-19 pandemic, Governor Newsom issued Executive Order N-2920, which temporarily suspends provisions of the Brown Act relating to public meetings. As such, Folsom Cordova Unified School District board members will be conducting open session board meetings via Zoom video teleconferencing. The meetings will also be live streamed on the district's YouTube channel. The public's health and well-being are top priority for the Board of Trustees of the Folsom Cordova Unified School District, and you are urged to take all appropriate health and safety precautions. Written comments were accepted until 3 p.m. today. These comments were emailed to the board prior to the board meeting for review and will not be read out loud during the meeting. At the discretion of the board, the superintendent will call roll to acknowledging the board received all electronic comments submitted by 3 p.m. today as it pertains to today's board meeting. Superintendent, if you can call roll.
Yes, Board Member Clark.
Here.
Board Member Short.
Here.
Board Member Reed.
Here.
Board Member Hoover.
Here.
Board Member Ranking.
Here.
Here. Board Member Gallant.
Here.
Thank you. All are counted for.
Thank you, ma'am. Reporting out closed session.
We have no action to report out from closed session.
Thank you, ma'am. Adoption of agenda.
I'll move it. I'll second.
Moved by Ms. Ranking, second by Mr. Short. Superintendent.
Member Clark.
Or seconded, I already moved it.
Mr. Clark, I believe that was Mr. Reed who moved it. Or seconded, I'm sorry.
It's been seconded by Mr. Reed. My apologies. Superintendent, please call roll.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Short. Board Member Short.
Here, yes.
Board Member Reed.
And here.
Board Member Hoover.
Aye.
Board Member Ranking.
Aye.
Student Board Member Gallant.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Item 7, agenda consent.
Move it.
I'll second.
Moved by Mr. Short, second by Mr. Hoover. Superintendent.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Short. Board Member Short.
Aye.
Board Member Reed.
Aye.
Board Member Hoover.
Aye.
Board Member Ranking.
Aye.
Board Member Gallant.
Aye.
All right, thank you. All right, moving forward, discussion item. Kelly, if you can move that up a little bit. Thank you, ma'am. Discussion item 8, school reopening, distance learning. Superintendent.
Yes, thank you, Board President Clark. And we do have a presentation, so I'm going to ask Ms. Goldsmith to put up our presentation, which was attached to the agenda about 4 o'clock today. And just to give a little bit of history, at our July 14th special board meeting, the board gave us direction to start the school year in distance learning. The next day, July 15th, the districts in Sacramento County all shared their collective guidance alongside our Sac County public health officials and the superintendents that we would all start in distance learning. And then last Friday, July 17th, the governor came out with his directive and metrics for those conditions in which schools could safely reopen and what metrics would then warrant if we would have to close again. So a lot has happened since our last special board meeting. And I'd like to go to the next slide, please, and just highlight some of the things that we are going to review this evening. With the new information that came out from California Department of Public Health, out of the governor's office, and also from our Sacramento County Public Health, we will share updates. I also want to welcome Dr. Olivier Cassirier, who is our Sacramento County Public Health Officer. She'll be joining Carrie Kay, our health coordinator for the district, in those health updates this evening. Dr. Cassirier, we appreciate you joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule to do that. As of our last meeting, the board gave us the ability to start working on schedules for elementary, middle, and high school. So we have proposed student schedules that we'll be reviewing this evening. We also have received feedback from our teachers and looking at potential platforms for how we deliver distance learning will be part of tonight's presentation. Looking at the current 2021 school year, which was adopted by the board last spring, to see if we might need to make any modifications. Also this last week, the CIF also came out with their guidance for our section. So we have some updates that Mr. Maroon will share with us. And then we'll end with next steps. Just as clarification, tonight is more informational and discussion. There are no action items attached to this particular agenda item tonight. However, we do have another special board meeting on August 3rd, in which we would anticipate action items coming forward on some of these topics. So with that, we can go to the next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Carrie Kay, our health coordinator for the district. Welcome, Carrie.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Collegian. Thank you, school board members. And again, thank you to all the parents and students who are out there watching tonight and listening and staying involved. I've been reflecting since we last had our last school board meeting. And I think the thing that keeps coming to mind for me is that as we're walking through all of this, there's nothing in a pandemic that is convenient or comfortable. Yet we're all doing our best and we're all doing extremely a lot of hard work out there. And I, for one, I know we're going to look at some of the most recent health updates and numbers that are happening in our county and our state. But beyond that, I am excited. I'm excited to hear what our professionals are putting together, not only from a colleague perspective of my fellow school nurses, teachers, counselors, all of our staff, but also as a parent. I know there's a lot of thought being put into all of this, and they are paying attention to the data and the numbers. And so with that, just want to say thank you and hop on in to our latest updates. So last week, we shared our numbers, what were happening within the state, and I have updated those from, they're updated as of July 21, and things are continuing to rise. Hospitalizations are trending upward. Sacramento County is definitely seeing that trend as well, not only just in regular hospital beds, but also in ICU beds. Last week, we talked about the rate of positivity, and I explained that as the rate of positivity means the percent of total tests that are taken out there that come back as a positive. So statewide, we're kind of holding steady. Last week when we met, it was 7.4%. And as of 2 days ago, it was holding steady at 7.5%. And if you remember, when we talked about that number, the goal is to remain at 5% or below for 14 days. So we're not quite there yet. Why is that positivity rate important? Well, that is one of the ways that the World Health Organization recommends that communities, counties, states take a look and make informed and measured decisions about when to reopen. So let's move on down here. Testing is still very sporadic, and the fastest turnaround continues to be about 72 hours. And also 2 days ago, our state hit a new record. We now have the highest case count of any state in the United States. We are higher than New York, as well as Florida. So I'm going to, Kelly, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick here. We're going to look at those Sacramento County numbers again. Okay, so here we are. We're back on that Sacramento County epidemiology page. And again, last week we talked about this. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. Scroll down here, over here in this left-hand corner. We're looking at the numbers specific to Rancho Cordova. So last week when we talked, our numbers were, total number of cases in Rancho were 253. So you can see that has continued to rise. We have not had any more deaths. So I'm happy to say that that's not been rising in the community of Rancho Cordova. And then down here, if we scroll on down to Folsom, cases this week are 173, and that is up from 132 last week. And then that number of 3 people who have passed away is the same. That has not changed. The other thing that we talked about last week is the fact that COVID, children are not immune to it, and they still are not immune to it. And we are still seeing some increases in this, this graph here. It breaks age groups down by 10. So here in this 0 to 9, and then if you add the 10 to 19, that number has increased as well. Last week, that was about 630. And then this week, I believe that is closer to 975. So you can see that's quite a number increase. And then the other thing that we talked about last week in terms of knowing that yes, we have the 50 to 65 age group there. That's a pretty significant number of positive cases. But more than that, you have the 18 to 49-year-olds. And that number is again still increasing, over 5,000 at this point. And those people, the reason that's important, we've talked about the age groups that are students in our district. Now, those are the people who are most likely staff or parents or caregivers. And so that's kind of where you can see some of this transference of cases could take place and be a concern from folks either in the classroom or home, coming to school, that sort of thing. So now let's click over here on the top tab to healthcare. So I know we're certainly wanting to not overstress our healthcare entities, and we're continuing to see increases. So over here, these numbers were updated as of 2 days ago. Still not a tremendous rise in cases in the hospital, but they are certainly on the rise. And same thing down here with the numbers of beds for ICU patients. And then I just really quickly, we didn't look at this page specifically last week, but this is, again, we've talked about the rate of positivity within the state of California holding steady at 7.5. And then this is encouraging right here for Sacramento County. Again, this was that last updated 2 days ago, and that positivity rate for Sac County at least is at 4.6%. So that is encouraging to me. And then I don't know if I can make my window move over. There we go. Here we have last week, in comparison, that positivity rate was at 8.3%. So if we're looking for a little bit of a silver lining, I think that is it. Okay, let me stop sharing. Whoops. Kelly, can you put your presentation back up? And I think we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So again, this slide will look familiar too. If you were with us last week, I left it here because I think it's important. I think it's important to remember that there are things as a school district that we can certainly control and help mitigate and make an environment safe and comfortable for staff when we are able to come back, as well as make it safe and comfortable for students when we can come back. And then there are those things out there that Folsom Cordova cannot control. And those things are still the same. The availability of testing supplies and the turnaround time of those tests, availability of the vaccination, and then the state mandates and county mandates that are out there. And we'll talk about some of those new things on the next slide. But I also want to remind everybody the things that we all can do are be compliant with the mask mandate, continue to practice social distancing, stay home when you're sick, and then realize this is a short-term thing. We will get to the other side of this, and we will get back to having more of a sense of normalcy. Okay, next slide. So last week, the governor made an announcement that all the counties on that watch list would be needing to start education in a distance learning format. So that's where we are. We had already, as a district, made the decision to go that direction. And also in that announcement, he included some metrics for returning to a hybrid model of instruction. And so what are those metrics? So Folsom Cordova can consider a return to in-person instruction once the Sacramento County has been off of that monitoring list for 14 consecutive days. And I put in parentheses there, again, that's one of those things that is just not exactly in the control of Folsom Cordova. Another factor that's not in our control is the ability for some sort of surveillance testing to take place of our staff. At this point, that is not possible within Sacramento County. We're still at a point of response testing, meaning that those who are being tested either have a known exposure, or sometimes it depends upon the healthcare entity that maybe their insurance is with. That healthcare entity actually may not even be testing folks unless they're in that higher risk category and have symptoms. And why is it that it's so hard to get a test sometimes? It's really comes down to the availability of those tests and then the reagents that are needed to actually activate the test and get back those results. So we're just not there yet as a county. But when those two above items are achieved, we can consider, in partnership with Sacramento County Public Health, a return to some sort of in-person instruction. Next slide. So thankfully, we really have a great relationship with our Sacramento County public health leaders. And again, Dr. Kazirier, thank you for being on the call this evening. We had a great conversation yesterday morning, many of us in the school nursing field within Sacramento County, and we asked a lot of questions and got back a lot of great answers. And one of the things that was on our list of questions was regarding in-person services for some of our special education students. And so we are awaiting further clarification from the California Department of Public Health, as well as the California Department of Education on that. But we're hopeful that once we hear back from those two entities, we'll be able to be specific with you all as our constituents and as our parents in what kinds of services we might be able to provide in person with all of the health precautions in place. And then the other thing that was interesting in the governor's announcement was this waiver, a potential for waivers for elementary schools. And we're not there yet because we don't have the ability to do that surveillance testing that I talked about on the previous slide. And so the waiver language, I think, took counties across the state kind of by surprise. They weren't anticipating that kind of a language in there just because it's well known that the testing is one of the areas that we need to improve before we'll be able to return to some sort of in-person learning. And so to put that waiver language out there kind of was putting the cart before the horse. And so hopefully before long, we'll be able to entertain those kinds of things, and some of them may be approved, but at this point, Sacramento County is not there. So with that, are there any other questions that we wanted to address at this time, or do you want to wait until we're a little bit further into the presentation?
Carrie, I have one quick question. So you said that we're waiting on clarification from Public Health and CDC. How long is that going to take? What's the timeline? Are we going to be waiting for weeks, or could it come any day? When do we get that information?
Sure. I actually will see if Dr. Kazirier wants to turn her mic on and maybe help with that answer.
Yeah, sure. Thank you again, members of the board, for the invitation. And thank you, Carrie, for that wonderful presentation. I was looking at you going through the numbers and I was like, why am I even here? You're doing such a good job. But anyway, to answer your question, we've been having discussions with the state to find out in more detail what exactly was meant by a waiver, what process we should go through, and what counties can even actually entertain a waiver. We're hoping to get some information we've been told that we'll get something in writing tomorrow, but until we see it, we don't know for sure, because we did have a lot of questions that we had for clarification as to the counties that can even entertain that. I've been in conversations with SCOE, and what we're looking at right now is really working, as Kerry pointed out, at being able to have a good plan in place for contact tracing, and then also being able to do at least some level of surveillance. And we're looking at different options, and it's going to take a couple of weeks to get those in everything ironed out. So even if we were to entertain a waiver, our thought is that it's going to be a couple of weeks before we're in a position to do that.
So even if we're on the watch list, wouldn't we have to wait that 14 days anyway, or could we just straight up apply for that waiver?
So what the state did was, and what we were anticipating is that being on the watch list, that we would be told that all schools have to start with distance learning.
Right.
But then they said elementary schools can request a waiver. And the reason for doing that is because of the science that shows that that younger children may not as easily pass on the infection to other people. And we already know that they tend to have milder disease. So there was a consideration that maybe we can look at elementary schools as a start, even for those that are on the watch list, but it would have to be through a waiver process. So that's the process that we're trying to work out. Our concern, though, is that there's still teachers and other staff in those settings. So we want to make sure that we have a system in place to be able to handle that if we're able to allow children back in school.
Okay. And then this could be either for Carrie or Dr. Kasiri. I know the report came out and it was updated on 7/23. By chance, did that include July 4th numbers from the holiday? If there was a spike on that or not?
Yes, it does. And I actually wanted to add a few points to what we are sharing on the dashboard. When we look by week, the last 4 weeks, each of the last 4 weeks, we've had over 1,000 cases. So right now in Sacramento County, our total is about 8,247. So if we've had over 1,000 cases in each of the last 4 weeks, that means that in the last month, we've had 50% of all of our COVID cases. So that gives you an idea of just the burden of disease that we're dealing with. Some of the other things that areas of concern is the delay in getting results back. Because, for example, when you look at our dashboard, we might state that we received 300 new reports, but all of those weren't done the day before. These are reports from tests that were done maybe 1-2 weeks before. We've had situations where we contact somebody and they're like, oh, my test was 14 days ago. So it's like, there's no intervention that would be even helpful in situations like that. And that makes it difficult because if you're not able to get to people in time to provide them with information about isolation, quarantine, it does make contact tracing less useful. And so it's very dependent on us being able to have a better turnaround time for our tests, and also to have the tests more readily available. We've had people who waited a long time, even 7 days, to be able to get registered or to be even able to get access to a test. So all of those delays make it difficult when you're thinking about bringing a large number of people together.
Okay. And just one last question for those in the audience that don't know. and either you or Carrie can kind of give a better explanation. Could you describe what that waiver actually is?
So basically, the what the state put in their announcement is that elementary schools can request a waiver, but they have to get support from the unions, whatever unions are involved in the school, and then also from the public and parents. And that request needs to be presented to the superintendent, who then submits that to public health. And then we make the decision on whether to grant the waiver or not. So what we're trying to clarify is, especially for a place like Sacramento County, where we're still seeing these kinds of numbers, should we be comfortable even entertaining those requests? I think some of the things that have been discussed is, and you actually, Kerry pointed this out, that when you look at Rancho Cordova and Folsom, your numbers are relatively low compared to, say, Sac City. And so would that be a consideration regionally to say, okay, at least this region, the numbers are not so high, we should entertain it? I don't know. But I think it's important for us to think this through so that it's equitable, because we don't want to have a situation where we have certain areas where children that are already disadvantaged then also are disadvantaged further because they don't have the option of being able to have in-person education. And the other reason also that they put in the waiver for children is knowing the feedback that we've gotten is, and we know that for young children, it's much harder for them to be able to get the education they need in distance learning. For the older ones, it's much easier, but for the younger ones, they need a lot more interaction. And so that was the reason for wanting to be able to provide that option. But again, we do understand the importance of education, but we also want to have a safe environment, because it won't help if we rush to do this and then 2 weeks after that we are finding that, oh gosh, we don't even have enough teachers to be able to teach, and so we have to close again.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the board?
I just have a follow-up on that quickly.
Mr. Hoover?
So in regards to the elementary waiver, I mean, first of all, I do think on the equity issue, I mean, we absolutely do have kids that in our district that are disadvantaged that would greatly benefit from in-person learning. So I think it should be given a serious look. But I'd love to hear if you could communicate with our district on the information you get in your conversations with the state when you receive it. I think that would be really helpful, especially because we're getting a lot of questions from families about wanting this waiver. Most of our parents we have heard from that they do want the option to return in person. So I think that's definitely something that would be really helpful to know. And if we're not able to, then what are the health reasons for that? I guess my question would be, if a full elementary waiver was not allowed, would it be possible for the county to consider maybe working with SCOE or some of our districts, a waiver for special education elementary students, a much smaller cohort, obviously, but a cohort that particularly is difficult to do virtually or to serve virtually? I was just wondering what your thoughts might be on that, if it was like a smaller cohort of students.
So for special education, actually, we were told that the state is coming out with guidelines for that, to be able to allow us to do it, to permit in person, regardless of whether we go for the waiver or not. So those are all details that we're waiting for, and we're really hoping that we'll get additional information tomorrow and over the next week so that we can quickly make these decisions, because just like you, we've had several schools, several parents contacting us asking that we consider the waiver, and definitely want to make sure that we do everything that we can to make this possible. And we're working as hard as we can. As Carrie pointed out, we met with the nurses and we want to be able to put together a plan so that we can work closely with the school officials in being able to do the contact tracing. But I think part of the other piece that we really want to make sure of is the ability to do testing, because it doesn't help if you're going to send people home and it takes them 7 days to be able to get a test, and then another 14 days to get the results. And just to let you know that with the emails I'm getting right now, I'm getting a lot of questions about exposures in different places. When we started seeing the spike, most of the cases were connected with gatherings. And so we were trying to deal with that. But now what we're finding is that a lot of the exposures are happening in businesses, and it's not just one sector, not just one business, it's everywhere. I'm getting emails from all different people. Hey, I have 2 here, I have 8 here, I have 3 here. So trying to deal with that, it's very difficult when you're having all of these kinds of outbreaks all over the place. We're also starting to see them in long-term care facilities. So of course, that means it's very difficult for us to be able to make sure we give appropriate attention to each one of them. And we want to be sure that we can act quickly.
On that note about testing, Carrie, or Dr. Kasirier, I mean, I think it was the 5th slide you talked about, the 2 requirements for coming back. It was being off the list for 14 days, which the governor laid out. Is this surveillance testing requirement something that the state is requiring, or the county, or where's that coming from? Just out of curiosity.
It was in the state documents. Sorry, Carrie, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I know you and I both have spent a lot of time reading those and studying them.
Go ahead.
It definitely was. The surveillance is, the recommendation for surveillance is in the state documents that came out to accompany the governor's announcement last week. And when I got to that point, I think that's probably when I was like, oh, because that's almost the hardest thing to accomplish at this point. And so until we as a county, and I know Dr. Kasirier feels the same way and can speak to this also, until we're at that point where we can offer, or the employee's individual healthcare provider can offer some sort of consistent surveillance, just to kind of make sure that we're working with a population of staff that are testing negative, we're not going to get that particular in place. Yeah,
Dr. Kasirier, is there any timeline on or prediction on that? I mean, I know obviously eventually we want to have some sort of rapid test available, but just curious on a timeline for that.
I can't give you a timeline. All I can say is that we're working, trying to calculate the numbers and looking for funding to be able to get this in place as quickly as possible. I'm thinking within the next couple of weeks, we'll have additional detail that we can share. And also finding out what exactly do they mean by surveillance? Do they expect us to really test every single teacher once a month, or are we able to do a sampling that is more doable? So we're still trying to figure out all of those details.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hoover. Any other questions from the board?
Yes, Mr. President.
Mr. Reed.
Thank you. Dr. Kasirier, thank you again for joining us. I very much appreciate your background, your expertise, and your guidance to the Folsom Cordova Unified School District. So thank you. I think I just have maybe one or two questions. One is there anything in county guidance that would prevent a teacher who wanted to teach from their classroom distance learning? Is there anything that would prevent that teacher from being able, from a health perspective, from being able to teach from their own classroom?
That question has come up from a lot of different people, and I think that's going to be permitted. So we're just waiting for the state to actually give it to us in writing so that we can provide guidance to our schools.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question I have, and I actually got this question from a teacher, and I thought it was a good question, which is, if a teacher wanted to bring in 5 students at a time, like a pod, that they wanted to have an opportunity to have an in-person pod that they would cycle through the class and have 5 students in at a time in the very large classroom. Would a teacher be permitted to do that under current health guidelines, or is that something that would not be permitted?
I don't have an answer to that one. That's one of the questions that we're trying to get clarification on, because that would include some of the special needs and maybe English learners as well. So, and the other clarification we're trying to get, and I think that it will be permitted, is being able to do some of the required screenings, vision, hearing. Will we be able to reestablish the dental screenings as well? So all of those are details that we need to work out.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Any other questions from the board? Mr. Short?
No, I don't have any right now. Thank you.
Ms. Ranking?
Thank you. I'm fine.
All right, thank you. With that being said, we will take it out to the public. Well, actually, proceed with the rest of the presentation. I'm sorry.
Thank you, President Clark. And I want to thank Dr. Kasirier and Carrie Kay again for sharing their expertise with us and just being so accessible and available. Here is the graphic that we've been sharing since we started the phase 1 of looking at how we do return to school. We're in phase 3 right now, still looking at a school start date of August 12th, looking at starting with distance learning, and hopefully when safe to do so, and we get the all clear from our county health and get off the monitoring list, looking at that transitional hybrid. So the graphic has just been revised a little bit in the order of how we're coming back. That's really the only change on this slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Wilson to continue on with the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Kaligian. What you're looking at right now is a different graphic than we've seen. We wanted to change it up a little bit here from the last few presentations. And we have off to the left the start of school, and the primary learning option, as you're all aware from the last few board meetings, is going into distance learning. As we move down that left-hand side of this graphic, you'll see that pending any changes that allow us to safely return to campus, we'll have the options of possibly hybrid transitional in the AM, PM, and the AB schedule as voted upon a few weeks ago, and the option of that virtual academy. As always, off to the far right-hand side, in any of these options and models, we always have our alternative education options of our Folsom Cordova Community Charter School, our homeschool program for our K-8 students, and our Wallenwood Independent Study Program for our 7 through 12 students. So again, just kind of a graphic to illustrate that while we have these two options off to the right-hand side, we are starting school in the distance learning from a K-12 option. And until things change, those two other options will be available at that time. Next slide, please. So again, this one is from our last presentation as well, where we were talking about preparing for the full distance learning. And I'm not going to go over this list. It is similar from the last board meeting, but it does discuss the types of things that we're considering as we are planning for the beginning of school on August 12th. The two things that I've added to this are the definitions at the very bottom. And we've used the term synchronous and asynchronous quite a bit in terms of distance learning. And what these are talking about, and again, I won't read the definitions fully, but the synchronous, if you can think of it as live as we can get, live interaction through video, live camera, such as we're doing right now. And that's an instruction and check-in between teachers and students. And that asynchronous distance learning, where it is more of a recorded video or audio instruction where it doesn't have to happen at the same time. That can be pre-recorded by an instructor, and a student may view that at a later time or date, or and they don't have to be at the same place doing this. So again, when we're using those two terms, synchronous and asynchronous, just wanted to make sure we're all on the similar page for definitions of those. Next slide, please. We're going to jump right into the proposed schedules. And again, they're broken up for various reasons. Elementary, you're going to be seeing 3 different schedules. And the purpose for that is because the minute requirements for each of these grade bands vary between TK and K, first and third, and then 4th through 12th. So this first one that we're looking at is, of course, for TK and K. And the requirement is 180 minutes of instruction per day. And again, these instructional minutes are going to be achieved through a combination of developmentally appropriate synchronous and asynchronous learning. So this is a student perspective of what they would see during the day or experience during a typical day. So of course, you'll see our 8:25 start time is a typical elementary start time, although a little bit different for TK and K. This is what the majority of elementary school students see. And again, I don't want to go through every moment here, but what you can see is the blocks of times that we have do capture the minutes with a break in between. And we've given allowing teachers to, are we doing ELA in the morning? Are we doing math in the morning? How do we want to structure the day to best meet the needs of our classes or our students? And I also want to point out that this is much like a plan book that you would find on a teacher's desk, to where when we see these times of 8:45 to 9:15, when you walk into a classroom during typical times, it's very rare that you see a teacher talking for all 30 minutes of instruction as laid out in this. What you typically see is a lesson that would take 5 to 10, maybe 15 minutes, depending on grade span. Some independent time for the students to work on that lesson while the teacher was monitoring those students and being able to answer questions, and then a wrap up of that lesson. So one of the concerns that I know people will see when they see this is my 5-year-old going to have to sit very quietly for 30 minutes watching the teacher talk for 30 minutes? And we very much see this structured as in-person as we can possibly get this to mirror what typical instruction looks like. You'll see that there's a large lunchtime built into this, and our thought process on that is absolutely we are preparing for providing meals during the school day when we return. And we do need to provide time for students and parents to go pick up those lunches and return back to their homes or wherever they are set up to do their distance learning. And in the afternoon, you'll see a block of time that's set aside for several different types of activities, and whether those are those asynchronous types of activities that we were discussing, such as pre-recorded social studies lessons, iReady instruction, science, PE, music. Again, it's just a nice mix throughout the day, but again, structure to where students will have that interaction time with their peers and their teachers. Next slide, please. This one is very similar, the first grade through third, and the minutes do go up in this. So you'll see the time frames expand here, up to 230 minutes per day is what the state is requiring in that 180-day schedule. So again, I'll let us look at this. It is very similar, just with larger blocks of time added for the slightly older children in this age span. I'll give that a minute, and then we can move on to the next slide here for 4th and 5th grade. So again, the minutes are upped in 4th and 5th grade, and actually these minutes mirror the 4th grade through 12th grade requirements. This schedule actually shows 245 minutes, but the requirement is 240 minutes. And very similar makeup of the schedule where there are blocks of time that the teachers are going to be able to meet the needs of their students and what they feel best for the learning of that class, whether math should be taught in the morning or ELA taught in the morning. Again, there is wiggle room in there for that. The other thing I want to point out in each of these was that time right before lunch, which is that lesson preview review for afternoon lessons. If we're doing asynchronous lessons, we do want those to be meaningful. We want them to sync up with our in-person lessons as well. So that is a time for the teachers to preview what lessons are going to be assigned to the students when they go into an asynchronous environment, and also a time to check back in with the students after their asynchronous times from the previous day to really solidify the learning that was taking place in that asynchronous time. I believe the next slide will move on into secondary schools, and I will turn it over to Dr. Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. And we also have 3 different schedules to share with you because of the different needs of the different secondary sites. So our first schedule is a 6-period day, and I've listed up there for you the schools that this would potentially impact. You're going to see a lot of similarities also between all 3 programs because we came at this in a direction of trying to consider things like what was appropriate screen time for students, various ways that instruction could be delivered, how do we cater to the social emotional needs of our students also. So all those went into play for all 3 schedules. They were all created roughly at the same time, and then Vista del Lago and Cordova High School had to make some adjustments because of their specific needs. So in all 3 schedules, you'll see Mondays, all periods meet on Mondays. And the idea here was for the teachers to be able to connect with all their students through the course of the week and kind of really lay out the week. And so a bunch of different things could happen in this time in terms of reminding students of assignments that are due or reminding students of perhaps office hours that teachers can be contacted, laying out things that students should be working on or thinking about as they progress through the week, et cetera. But on Mondays, all teachers would interact with their students. There is a break, as you can see, after 3rd period, just to, again, step away from the computer, have a little downtime away from the screen. And then students come back 4th through 6th period. And then at 11:50, 6th period concludes, and we have lunchtime as well as the asynchronous learning time. The Tuesday through Friday, if you'll recall, the schedule that we had for the A-B cohorts, our students hopscotched. So half the students came on Tuesday, the next half came on Wednesday, and vice versa. In this schedule, what's hopscotching is the periods. And so on Tuesdays, we have 0 period, first, advisory, 2nd period, and then we have a student activities section. I'll explain that here in a minute. Lunchtime, 3rd period, and then in the asynchronous learning. And so then it flips the next day, obviously. So now we're covering 4th period, 5th period, and 6th period. The student activities intervention piece right there could house a couple different things. We're looking at perhaps this might be a time where student government could meet, and also student government could reach out to students on campus in terms of even virtual activities they're putting together or things that they might be creating themselves to share out with the student body. Also, it was felt that it was very important for us to have that advisory piece on each day for that 30 minutes, because we do also want to continue working on all the things that our PBIS teams are creating. We want to work on the things related to social emotional health of our students. So being able to touch base in that regard for all of our students also is a nice break to the academics, but also just another way of connecting on a personal level to our students. And then, of course, the day ends synchronously at 2 o'clock, and students have asynchronous time from 2 to 3:30. This schedule is on Mondays, it's 120 minutes synchronous learning and 130 asynchronous. And then Tuesdays through Fridays, we have 210 synchronous minutes and then 90 asynchronous. Also, just so you're aware, 0 period, those are some specialty classes or some mostly a lot of times elective classes. And those are not counted in the minutes because not all students attend 0 period. So those are not included in those minutes at all. If we can go to Vista schedule. So Vista schedule, again, very similar, except, in terms of the 4x4, so they're covering on Mondays all 4 of their classes, a break in between, and then lunch and asynchronous learning at the conclusion of that. It starts at 11:40 for them on Mondays. And then Vista students do have all their classes every day. So they do have first period, second period, also, I'm sorry, zero period also if they have a zero period, third and fourth. And one of the reasons for this is we have to remember that Vista students are completing more work in a shorter amount of time. So they're on kind of an accelerated model, if you will. And so that is why the schedule was built this way to account for that. They still have what the last schedule called advisory, Vista refers to as flex time, but it serves the same purpose in terms of a multitude of things that students can access in terms of support academically or social emotionally. And then asynchronous learning starts at 2:40 also. So again, Mondays 120 minutes synchronous, 140 asynchronous. Tuesdays through Fridays are 250 minutes synchronous and 50 asynchronous each day. So if we can go to Cordova High School schedule. So again, Cordova High School had a little bit more of a challenge because they're our only school that actually has a 7-period day, and students take 7 periods, plus they do have a 0 period. So again, Monday, is all the classes, with the exception of 0 period. The faculty, the leadership team, I should say, did agree that 0 period wouldn't be included in Monday. There's fewer classes in 0 period, so it didn't. The hope is that there won't be a negative impact in that regard. Same thing though, you have periods 1 through 3, and then the break 4 through 7, and then into asynchronous learning and lunch. As you can see on their schedule, in order to accommodate that 7th period, it's 0 period and 7th that makes almost a 4x4 block similar to Vista. So on Tuesdays, you'd have 0 period first, that intervention block, lunch, and then second, third period, and then an asynchronous learning. And then Wednesday, it's now 4th period through 7th period. Same thing, intervention stays the same for the entire week. Lunch stays the same for the entire week also. So all of those things, in terms of also what Mr. Wilson was saying, the lunch we are looking at is an hour lunch, which is a good amount of time, to, again, step away from the screen. But also in terms of the intervention time, it allows for a little flexibility in terms of a little wiggle room in case it takes some students who are going to the campus to pick up lunches in order to get back before they start their 3rd period class or their 7th period class, depending at 1:30. So that also helps us a little bit in that lunch. It gives us a little bit, all the schedules give us a little bit of wiggle room in that regard in terms of if students are coming to campus to pick up lunches and then return home for their afternoon classes. This schedule is 140 synchronous minutes on Mondays and 105 asynchronous, and then Tuesdays through Fridays, 250 minutes, and then 50 asynchronous minutes. And that concludes the presentation for the secondary schedules.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. I just had a quick question about the last slide in that intervention schedule that you have, 30 minutes. Now, explain to me what's going to happen in those 30 minutes during the intervention period.
Yeah, so again, the different schools called it different things in terms of intervention or advisory, flex, and they're all very similar in terms of a whole bunch of different things could be going. So you could have, for instance, lessons that are put in here, for lack of a better term, something that could be gone over in terms of working on the school's culture. Could be an aspect of it. This also might be an opportunity, though, for teachers to reach out and say, hey, during the intervention on Wednesday, I'd like to pull these 7 kids together in a small group online because, they're struggling with certain concept and we want to intervene. And so you could see RTI type interventions built into this. You could see PBIS and full school culture things done during this time. It really allows the school to be flexible in terms of whatever their specific needs are with their specific kids.
All right, thank you. You saw where I was going with that.
Of course.
Okay. Any questions from the board real quick before we move on?
I have a quick one, Chris.
Mr. Hoover?
I think it's just one at this point. Just for now, I know a lot of families are going to wonder, what a typical day is going to look like, what the asynchronous is going to look like. What kind of flexibility will they have throughout the day? So like what, when you see like this is first period or, this is ELA math, are they going to be sitting in a Zoom call at that point? Is this something where it's just, class to class? I'm mainly kind of trying to get at, those families with multiple children and maybe, not multiple devices or not necessarily an enough internet bandwidth, right, to cover even if they have the devices. So just trying to figure out what this will look like for them.
Yeah, we're working with Pam Oyen and David Stone in the ETIS department to address those concerns and some of those remaining needs. Lori Emmington used a phrase I really liked for synchronous learning, and synchronous learning means that we're together in real time. And so whenever you see, like in the schedule right now, we're looking at Cordova high schools. So the periods that are listed there by time frame, first period, second period, third period, those are done through Microsoft Teams. And so those that we're all together in real time. And then 2:40 to 3:30, the asynchronous learning, we've put it in there because we got to account for those minutes, and we have to account for the fact that we'll be expecting product back, if you will, evidence of learning, assignments, et cetera, from students. So that it has to be accounted for. But really, a student could choose, depending on what's going on with their family or what's going on in their life, maybe a lot of that work does get done later on in the evening. So there is a little bit of flexibility there in terms of what students are doing during that time, if that helped at all.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I mean, at least to get a better understanding of, obviously being at home for families is somewhat of a different situation where, they may not have someone at home helping them, keeping them accountable, or, their parents may be at work, for example, something like that. So I'm just trying to figure out how, if there's any flexibility there in the assignments, or if that conversation had even been had yet. So
I think we're still working on that aspect, but I definitely believe that we're not back to a traditional model. We're not back to normalcy. And I think there still has to be an aspect of grace. And, and I believe that our teachers, being the professionals they are willing to work with our students. I can tell you as a teacher, even back during the traditional model, when I was working in school, and I had students came from really difficult situations, and I was aware of those situations. And so I did make accommodations and accepted special circumstances and met them wherever they needed to in order to help them still progress in their learning. And so I would think that those same things would happen in this model as well. And we will be taking attendance. That's a huge difference from our spring experience. And so everything happening will be done in real time and will be captured with attendance. And so that's also going to be an aspect of those social emotional pieces and those intervention blocks, advisory blocks, et cetera. Because besides the teacher reaching out in terms of, hey, Josh, why aren't you in class again? This is the second time you haven't been there. Is there something going on? And if I don't get a response from Josh, then it's a call to my principal or my counselor or some other support folks. Hey, I need some help, because I haven't connected with Josh this week. I'm not sure what's going on. And so I think our safety nets are going to be a lot tighter because of the fact that we have such a structured schedule now. And we have the personnel that will step in and help teachers intervene when there's challenges.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think it's going to be important, to make sure that kids aren't falling through the cracks, and, may even require some feet on the ground, to get out there and make sure that the learning is happening. But okay, well, I'll save the rest of my questions for later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover. Any other questions from the board?
President
I
Clark?
had 2 quick questions. That's okay.
Oh, go ahead, ma'am.
Okay, thanks. So as far as material goes, is there a way for students to possibly access textbooks in any way to reduce the amount of screen time? Just wondering.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That's one of the things that we're currently working on. All the school sites are working on, much like kind of we did in terms of distribution of the Chromebooks. That will continue also, but then also there's got to be a distribution of the materials. And so again, back in the spring, unfortunately, we didn't know we were going to be locked out when we left out on that Friday. And what happened, it was basically an order that we could not return to the schools and we couldn't pick up the materials, which made things really difficult. So we're in a little bit of a different situation. And so the schools are working on how they will package all those materials and have those ready for students to pick up so that students do have their appropriate materials at home, because our teachers will be using all of our approved curriculum in their classes. So it'll be vital for students to have those materials. Great question.
Okay, thank you so much. Just one more question. So about accountability, is there going to be a certain rule where students are required to keep their screens on if we decide to do synchronous learning, or are they okay keeping their screens off? Just a quick question about that.
No, I think it's a great question also in terms of, and then we're still working out those details. So I can't tell you we have an actual answer on that one, because for instance, depending on where a student is, sometimes turning off the screen allows for a more stable internet connection. So you can hear really well, but if you have your video going, sometimes it causes problems for that student's internet. And so we got to be cognitive and mindful of those challenges. So, but those are all definitely things that we definitely need to take into account.
Okay, thank you so much.
Bet.
Questions, President?
Board Member Short.
Yeah, you were talking about the times that the teacher is available to be contacted. Has there been any discussion where, what we learned before was, we had an emergency situation and a lot of teachers didn't really know how to deal with the Zoom, but now we're going into a program very robust, but the training that goes along our learning curve on doing this, the teachers are definitely going to be getting up to speed on it. But also, is there any orientation or time given to the parents? Because the parents also need to be part of the engagement of their student at home and being available to coach the parents on making sure they log on and are also accountable to the program here. Is there any time for that, or any discussion that's been on orientation for the parents?
Yeah, we're absolutely working on that, both for the students and for the parents. And so along with some of the professional development materials we'll be putting together for teachers, there will also be some links for parents and students to access to help explain, how to use the online platforms, and, just to make the whole process easier, whether you're a student trying to figure out, exactly how this is going to work, or whether or not you're a parent trying to support. We want to provide those links as well, so that parents and students have that information to make it as smooth. We know there'll be hiccups the first week or two into school as everyone gets used to this new format, but we want it to be as smooth as possible. So yeah, there'll definitely be resources for parents and students as well as teachers.
Okay, thank you. That's my question.
Thank you. Mr. Reed.
Yeah, just a quick question about the schedule. And actually, I'm more focused on the Cordova High schedule, the Folsom High schedule, and the middle school schedules. So on Tuesday, I'll just use first period as an example. First period meets on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Would the expectation be that if you're, let's say, Wednesday or Friday, that the first period class would be doing homework or asynchronous learning on Wednesday and Friday? And the same question obviously would apply to all the periods where they're not meeting. Or is the anticipation that they wouldn't be doing no work on the off days?
Yeah, and thanks for asking that very much, Mr. Reed, because when you look at the schedule, it's easy to kind of fall in that mindset. But what you have to remember is that all students have all these periods. So when every single student will be in first period. Every single student will be in fifth period. There's no time when periods are listed that students aren't sitting in those classrooms. Now, I might be a teacher that might have a prep during that period, but students are all in those periods. So when first period's meeting, it's not like a certain group of students are not then meeting. It will be that way when we do the A-B model, when we're hopscotching students. Mondays, students are there, Tuesdays, and some students are not there, and vice versa. But in this schedule, when there's a period listed, every student is quote unquote in the seat for that class. Does that make sense?
Yes, but it's conceivable that on Tuesday, the first period teacher at the end of the class will tell the students, I want you to do X, Y, and Z between now and Thursday, and that X, Y, and Z might be watch a half-hour video and read this chapter and do this page of questions. I mean, that the students would just have to figure out how to accommodate that into their schedule
Right.
between Tuesday and Thursday, correct?
Yeah, so that would, be the work that they would be doing at asynchronous time, and then also it would be, what we would normally have considered regular homework. That will be part of the discussion with teachers as we move forward, in terms of we want to try to not overload students as well. We really want to be smart in terms of the essential standards that we're covering and really targeted learning objectives, and not assign work for just busy work per se, but really assign work that just gets to, showing that the student has learned the standard or the skill that's being taught.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Rankin, did you have any questions?
No, but I'm happy with what I'm seeing. I like the direction we're going in. So I'm looking forward to.
I just have one more. If we can go back to slide 11, I think. Now, slide 11. Let's see. I think it's second and third. Or the fifth. One more. First to third. Okay. Just kind of looking at the screen time that they'll be doing. Got kind of a concern with I see the 825 to 855. That's fine. The 855 to 925, and then there's a little lull. But I'm looking at that 940 to 1020 ELA or math, and then the 1020 to 1050. Is that, in my calculations right, is that 50 minutes just boom of screen time for those kids?
It's 50 minutes of instruction. Now, again, as mentioned earlier, if we see this in the teacher lesson plan book, the teacher's not going to be talking for 50 minutes. So what we're envisioning in this with the teachers that we've been working with the principals who have had eyes on this and the other districts who are looking at schedules similar to this is that the teacher would start with a lesson, teach 10 to 15 minutes or whatever's appropriate for that lesson for the age group that they're working with. And what's happening in a lot of the synchronous classes across the states are students are then directed to either turn off their cameras or go dark for a few minutes to work on something independently, pop on their screen if they have a question for the teacher. So again, we're going to be working with our teachers through training, through our cadre of teachers that are developing these lessons and working with how to teach in a synchronous lesson and an asynchronous lesson, in really doing those best practices so that we don't have 50 minutes of one person talking and 25 students trying to listen for 50 minutes, because that is not the best practice.
Okay, I was a little concerned about that when you're looking at first graders and through third graders, and they're sitting in front of that screen. That can be I don't know.
Correct.
A lot of screen time going there. Okay, I'm good. What do we have next?
Hey, Mr. President, real quick. I know there was some concerns raised about Microsoft Teams. Was there a reason we're switching to that, or not leaving it up to the teachers? Or I'm just curious what the thinking is.
We actually, that's coming up in the slide presentation here, and I'm happy to put the rationale out there once we do the recommendations. This one is just a brief few comments on special education schedule, which given the schedules that you've all seen, our special education would follow the grade level distance learning schedules that were just presented. And then the next one down here is the special education focus groups. They met July 20th through the 22nd to develop those in-person options that may be implemented, as we heard from Dr. Couturier and Mrs. K, when and if it becomes feasible, and pending that guidance from the CDPH. So much more information to come on this, but again, in terms of schedules, the student schedules would mirror that we've already seen. They're part of our same scheduling. Next slide, please. Platform recommendations. Here you go. So lots went into this, and we used a few different platforms from March on, and again, we had success stories and we had stories that didn't go so well. And a lot of that was due to implementation and the speed in which we did that. But we also spent a lot of time looking at all of our options out there, talking with our teachers, talking with parents, using the task forces that we assembled to really discuss the pros and cons of various items out there, and listening to the concerns of the things that we did use as well. What it came down to here is we broke it up in a few different grade levels. First, we're going to start with our TK through our third grade students. And it is a tough group to have independently signing into platforms and navigating those systems without a parent right there to help them or somebody else to help them. So one of the reasons that we went to and we're going to call this classroom management or document management platform, is Seesaw is much more kid friendly for the younger students. And looking at, to your point, Mr. Hoover, the synchronous live sessions, we are recommending Microsoft Teams, and there's a multitude of reasons for this. Right now we're using Zoom. Microsoft Teams and Zoom, they switch back when I have a few different meetings a day on each of them, and it is pretty quick to learn each platform once we're used to this type of interaction. So the learning curve isn't going to be real large on moving to a different platform, but some of the rationale here, and I'll pull up a couple other ones. Pam Owen sent me a few other reasons that I did not quite highlight in here, but we'll start with what I put there. Is we already use the Microsoft suite across our district and have for numerous years. We own Microsoft Teams. We have it, we use it, it's already integrated into our systems. The program is very secure. It allows for live video engagement with students and teachers, and as I mentioned before, it's easy to use. Some of the other points to Microsoft Teams here is the students are going to access Teams with their district accounts, which that they already have. So that's the same. They're going to be using their secure logins to get into their accounts here. We're also able to provide teachers options for calling parents or students through Microsoft Teams. A lot of the concerns that teachers had last year in connecting with families was using their personal either cell phones or home phone lines in terms of not being able to shut off caller ID or whatever the situation was. And this, using Microsoft Teams, would allow them to use a Microsoft Teams number to make that connection with their families. Again, more secure for the students, families, and the teachers. Also, and this is a big one because of the state requirements for attendance and accountability, we have the ability to download the attendance reports from the synchronous sessions. So we know what students were on, what students were not, how long these things went on for. So we can track attendance through Microsoft Teams. It also, we're working on syncing Teams with PowerSchool. So it also adds another layer of security to the setup here. So like this, where we are using Zoom is a great product, it's secure, all of that, but it is completely outside of what we typically do and not linked to our other systems. So the Microsoft Teams, that's the reason we are recommending that for TK through 12th grade. As far as the class management system, and well, let me back up a little bit for Seesaw. Again, we utilized Schoology in March, and Schoology is a PowerSchool product, and they were very helpful to us in our time of need, where they came in and they provided training for us at a very low cost, and they gave us the product for free to use while in the time that we needed to. It did work well. It implemented well, and we have success stories on that. We had some struggles as well that we've discussed. Seesaw, again, we decided to move to this for the kid friendliness of it and the interaction for our most vulnerable populations that have a very difficult time navigating without a parent right next to them or an adult next to them. There is a price tag associated with this one for the TK through 3rd grade students. It would be about $35,000, $35,500 to be exact. And that does include the PD that we would take our teachers through in those grade spans that would be utilizing this. And of course, creating PD for parents and students to use this. As far as 4th through 12th grade, Google Classroom was one that many of our teachers used when we went into, from March, that first distance learning, for a multitude of reasons. One, several grade spans were already using it, and it was something familiar. Our students already have Google logins. And for those grade spans, 4th through 12th, it's a pretty easy shift. And due to the amount of synchronous time that our students and teachers will be having, it really comes down to this document management system of where do I turn in my assignments and where do I find my assignments. And so that time living in this, this management system is going to be limited to basically assignment management, where the teacher interaction now will take place in Microsoft Teams. So those are our recommendations for both the synchronous times through Microsoft Teams and classroom management, broken up by the grade levels. Next slide, please. I don't know if we want to pause here before we go into instructional calendar updates and talk about the platforms.
Yeah, let's go back, and I actually have a couple of questions about Microsoft Teams, and you know, like kind of looking at the last line, it says it's been working on updates to improve large group experience.
Yes.
What do they mean by that, large group? I mean, can we get separate screens where the teacher can see each student, or is it just
Right.
a limited amount? I mean, when you say large group, I'm kind of concerned about that.
Sure. So right now, if you're familiar with Teams, we have the ability to see all kids in the classroom at the time, but not at the same time. It's the last four speakers that you end up seeing when you're in a Microsoft team meeting. Microsoft has heard that, and the fix will be in the beginning of August. They're already slated to do it. Prototypes are already out, and they're actually going so big to handle college courses of lecture halls with where you see 150 thumbnails. Now, we don't need that,
Right.
but for our needs of handling either a class of 24 up to 37 kids, the teachers will be able to see all students at the same time and be able to interact with them. So that is one of the fixes, but that was one of our concerns when we started looking at these platforms, because just seeing the last four speakers is not good. And even when we're using Zoom, I think about 25 is the max you're getting, and then you have to flip screens to get to the next one. So they're actually going to provide an update to Teams that allows for a better experience in seeing all the kids.
So, my next question is, what is the timeline for that?
Before school starts. David Stone has been in contact with Microsoft, and Microsoft actually is very good about their updates and how quickly they come out. We hope, but that's where we're at. So the beginning of August is when this will start.
Did you say we hope?
Well,
that
I'm
sound
not going to
promising,
guarantee.
So
it's out of my control.
Yeah, well, and then like I said, I'm not familiar with Microsoft Teams, but I've just heard a few things here and there. Does it have the same hand raise feature that we experience with Zoom?
Yes, yeah, all the same features of a live conferencing. You're able to share a screen, you're able to raise your hands, you're able to interact and speak, and then of course that added feature that we've been discussing where we see everybody there. It really does. Again, and to your point about switching, we never really did adopt Zoom. It was just a tool that was available to our teachers, and
Sure.
Some chose to use it. Security for those that didn't want to use it was a big key component to why they weren't doing it. And we think we have this, we do have it solved by going through Teams, which exists in our virtual space in our district. This is part of our suite of offerings rather than a product like Zoom that lives outside of our network.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Clark, can I just ask?
Yes, Ms. Ranking.
Just because it has to do with what you were asking. So will a teacher have the ability, if he or she groups students into like a pod and sends them off into a separate meeting room to work together, will that teacher have the opportunity to oversee all the groups that are working together? I think that was one of the problems with Zoom, that you couldn't see all the...
Right. So with most of these platforms, you have the ability to group into them. Now, as you're asking to be able to look in on all of them simultaneously, Zoom doesn't offer that either. And Teams, I'm not positive if it does, but the teacher has the opportunity to pop into each of the created groups. So I think I'm answering your question. And again,
you are.
Okay.
Yeah, they have to pop in. They don't have oversight of all of them at the same time. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. President, just quickly, so yeah, and I think there were some issues with Zoom too. I'd be curious to know, I mean, once Zoom gets over a certain amount of people, I know last year some of our Zoom calls were really rough. So, it'd be interesting to know if Microsoft Teams is actually better with that, than Zoom. But could you talk a little more about Seesaw and what it does? I mean, is it similar to Schoology where it kind of brings everything together, or is it different? I'm not familiar with it, so I would love to.
Sure, and I am by no means an expert on Seesaw. We had to rely on the teachers that on their own used it, as well as our tech department that vetted this, and from what we have seen also from a C&I perspective. My understanding is this, that it is from just a looks perspective, it's much more kid-friendly. It's set up user-friendly, more so where it is a document management system. So at the end of the day, it does exactly what basically Google Docs will do. It does the exact same thing that Schoology will do. but it has a different user interface to it that is much more easy to navigate. The other side of this, and I believe you may have brought this up a few board meetings ago, that the sign-on for signing into things and multiple sign-ins to get to multiple things. The sign-in for Seesaw will exist in Clever. And parents are probably shaking their heads saying, yep, I know what Clever is. That's where all of our platforms and everything that we use exists. So it's the same, that's where students will go to get here. Whereas in the Schoology, they would go somewhere else to sign into Schoology and occasionally have to pop out to go into Clever to get to whether it was a Vision or Benchmark. We want everything to exist in one place at this point, and Seesaw integrates into Clever.
Yeah, the signing in with Clever would be far superior. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's great to hear. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other questions from the board? Let's move forward.
All right. Next slide, please. Instructional calendar updates. And I'm not sure if Don Ogden wanted to pop in on this, but I'm happy to cover the part of this that's on the slide here. But I know we wanted to view the instructional calendar a little bit. But again, the guidelines that we're working off of right now per SB 98 have the 180-day requirement for all of our students for this upcoming school year. And as you saw in our calendars, we have the instructional minute requirements imposing the minimum instructional minutes by grade level. That would be what you typically see on a minimum day in our schools. So again, the breakdown is 180 for kinder, TK through kinder, 230 for 1 and 3, and then from 4th grade through 12th grade is 240 minutes. Right now, just for board information, our current 2021 instructional calendar reflects 181 instructional days with 3 non-instructional days in that calendar. Again, this information is provided for board discussion regarding now that you've seen the school schedules and the platforms that we are proposing. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn this over to Peter Maroon to go over the latest updates on CIF sports.
Good evening, Dr. Kaligian, members of the board and the community. I'm excited to share with you that the state and the section office have both approved calendars for the upcoming school year as far as athletics is concerned. And I think the takeaway when you look at all the things that have taken place is the fact that they're allowing us to be flexible and allowing choices. So with that, the state office on Monday released our education-based athletics in regards to the calendar. They gave each section the option to either start in December or January. And what they did is they combined 3 seasons into 2. Now with that, as you can imagine, it's going to have some challenges, but having that combination and allowing us the flexibility either start in December or January gave each section a little bit of latitude to flex out their schedules and make it more amenable to folks. So with that, our section chose to start in December. The state then went by and looked at the different bylaws and regulations that would have to be amended in order to allow a later start year and of course a modified calendar because of the COVID-19. So with that, they consulted the governor's office, the California Department of Education, the California Department of Public Health, and the local counties. And all of this, they allowed it to, like I said, to be flexible and adjust. The big takeaway here is under bullet number 4, the temporary suspension of bylaw 600 to 605, allowing students to participate in outside teams at the same time they participate in high school sports, which typically does not happen. Because they allow that, that allows parents to make choices, whether their kids participate in clubs or they participate in multiple school teams. So for instance, an athlete can participate in volleyball during the fall season, and because it overlaps with the spring season, they can also participate with basketball. So they could be playing multiple sports. The challenge with that is there is a bylaw in the CIF that does not allow athletes to participate more than 18 hours a week. That includes games. So it makes it a challenge for our coaches and our staff to track that. Again, you know, as they give options to folks and choices, it's gonna put our athletes sometimes allowing them to choose between different sports, and it's gonna be difficult in that second season when you look at the calendar. When you have 17 sports going on at one time, I don't know how an athlete can have multiple sports with some of the challenges and the overlapping. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I'm not going to read that to you. There's a lot of information there, but what you can see, I wanted to demonstrate the overlap that takes place in the fall season versus the spring season. And when typically the 4 sports that happen for us, and what I mean by that is cross country, boys and girls volleyball, and football in the fall, those are typically, happening from August through November. And now football, for instance, if our teams make playoffs, could be going into April. So they could be starting prior to the winter break and finishing somewhere after the spring break or during the spring break. So it's a long season. It extends it a longer period of time, but it overlaps with other sports as well. With that, in the spring, as you can see, these are specifically our sports that we participate in. There's 17 of them, and lacrosse obviously is for Vista High School specifically. And I didn't give you exact finish dates because if our teams make playoffs, and traditionally all 3 of our schools have been very competitive in making playoffs, it's going to extend some of this past our school year, specifically for baseball and softball, for instance. Even track and field could be going up to June 26th, depending on how well our students athletes do. So just wanted to keep that in mind as we go through this. One of the things I want to share with you is that in this, one of the challenges that comes with it is the first season that we have, typically we'll have about 10 teams. That's, per sport plus levels of sports within that. But when you get into the spring season, you're going to have, for Cordova and Folsom High School, you'll have 27 teams taking place. And for Vista, you'll have 31 teams taking place during that season. But I need you to recognize also there is a start time for the spring sports. Some of them will start on February the 22nd. Others will start on March the 8th. So there's an automatic separation before, but there is a lot of overlapping. And as we go into the next slide, please. So here's some of the challenges that I'm working with athletic directors and the assistant principals at each of the school sites. Summer extension, what do we do from July to December? What's that going to look like? What are teams going to be allowed to do to condition to practice based upon the county health department? And here I have to ask that we be a little bit lenient and that I have to advocate for our athletes and our parents and our community. When I combine the 2 communities, when we look at youth sports and high school sports, not including private teams or travel teams, we had 13,000 student athletes participating out of 21,000 kids in our community. That's 64% of our students in our community participating in youth and high school and middle school sports. That's important to keep in mind because when we get into the August through December, if we're not having our kids participate in extracurricular activities, not just sports, but extracurricular activities, social emotional learning is going to be a challenge. Motivation is going to be a challenge, and distant learning is going to be hampered. Our engagement is really predicated on how much things we can offer our kids. Transportation will be a challenge. I'll work with our transportation department to figure that out. We may need to look to a different model to provide opportunities for our kids and our parents to support that. Facility use is going to be overwhelmed, to be honest with you. We typically don't have 3 seasons squeezed into 6 months. Which is going to make it a challenge, but we'll work through those challenges with our facilities department and our community. We're going to need some support from our middle schools for our high schools during the basketball and volleyball season when they overlap. Our high school is going to need to use our middle school gyms in order to accommodate all the needs that we have. We'll need additional use of golf courses. Now we have boys and girls both having golf, matches at the same time. And now you're talking about 3 high schools into 2 golf courses with 6 teams each. That's going to be a challenge, but we'll work with our communities for those. Grading eligibility. This is the takeaway for parents. Because we have grades that will come out in December, they will determine athletic eligibility. So spring grades will not count in this situation, since the seasons have both been pushed back to the end, basically starting in the middle of December. Typically, we'll have grades being, given out to our students in December. So it's imperative our students are engaged with distant learning, that they do maintain those grades. Otherwise, it's going to be, tough for them to participate in sports during the fall and spring seasons of this year. And then outside use of facilities, that's going to be a challenge when we have to have our own facilities impacted by all of our programs that are taking place. So it's going to make it a challenge. And I think with Matt Washburn and myself, we can work with our cities to both figure out some different ways of making that happen, some opportunities. With that in mind, as I said, Last year, I couldn't give you exact numbers for the total number of athletes participating in our community. I can tell you in our district alone, 33% of our high school, secondary students, high school and middle school students participate in athletics. That's not including participation rates for our bands, our theater, our extracurricular activities. When you add all those factors in, the message I want to share with you tonight is please consider that as we look at what can we do from July to December. What are we going to allow our students and our schools to do? The model that we've been using up until this point for our summer reopening has had some challenges, as we know we would. But to that point, we've done a pretty good job of following the protocol and maintaining those challenges as they come about. And it's been great to work with Dr. Kazarian and her support from her staff. They've been really good about responding to our questions as soon as we put them out there. So with that, I'd like to thank her personally from our athletic groups. But I really need to advocate for extracurricular activities and have us keep an open mind. We want to give parents choices. Any of all of this, obviously, if parents choose for their students not to participate, there will be no harm. That was one of the things that came out from the governor. That is one of the things that came out from the CIF and the National Federation of High School Sports. So I want parents to keep that in mind. And then for those who do want to participate, what is it going to look like? We're going to work on that and see what we can come up with to help guide those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Was there another slide to be presented? Or okay, great. Questions. So, Peter, while I have you on, can we go back a couple of slides, please? Right there. All right. So I'm looking at all this, and it looks good. I like it. I mean, it's going to be a lonely Friday night this fall for me and my wife because we like high school football. But I'm just kind of looking at everything here, and it's all centered around high school. Now, me being the athletic guy, I'll take in a good middle school game too. Are we excluding our middle school program from this, or?
Not at all. Not at all. That's a great question. I actually was on the phone with our two commissioners from our middle schools. They had to wait until the CIF put out their calendar in order for them to work on theirs. So they're in the midst of doing that right now. One of the things that we discussed is typically we'd have a match twice against each of the schools within our leagues. We're looking at having possibly one match with our schools within our leagues. But the impetus is we want to make sure we allow still to have kind of a JV and a varsity team within middle school sports so that we can allow a lot more students to be involved in that. But we're working on those middle school schedules. They've not gone away. I know that we've gotten assurances from our Twin Rivers Athletic League, which is the Rancho Cordova schools with some of the private schools there, as well as our fall or FAL league for the Folsom schools. So they are working those things. They may not be able to offer all the different sports because of facilities and overlap, but they are going to offer as many as possible so that we can have those schedules in place. As soon as I get those, I'll be happy to forward those to you.
Okay. Also, the feeder programs that we have out there, I mean, I know that you'll be getting information on that. If you can keep the board informed on what's going on with that, it'd be greatly appreciated. And I was glad to hear that the extracurricular and other activities will be taking place too. So thank you. Any other questions from the board?
President Clark?
Mr. Hoover?
Reed.
I'm sorry. I'm looking at Josh. Mr. Reed.
No worries. Yeah, I have some general questions. They didn't really necessarily pertain to any one of these slides. Is this the opportunity to ask those questions?
Yes.
Okay. Let me just start at the top. So on professional development, as we approach the start of the year, I just had a general question for staff, whether they feel that we have adequate time for training for the teachers, and if that's something that is being discussed right now to ensure that everybody feels that enough time is being provided.
And I think both Mr. Wilson and Dr. Huber can address, because they're working with 30 teachers right now that are expert teachers that are going to work with all of our teachers by a grade level span. So can you speak to the professional development pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple different pieces to your question here. Number one is the type of PD that's necessary to make both our teachers as well as our parents and students comfortable with the platforms and with the other technology pieces that they're going to be interacting with, as well as that lesson development and how to deliver those instructional lessons, whether they're synchronous or asynchronous. So we're absolutely putting together a professional development offering for the teachers for all of that, as well as the parents, as I mentioned earlier. In terms of enough days to train the teachers, and I know that our HR department as well as the bargaining unit are working on what do those non-instructional days look like right now, and how can we best utilize those to bring everybody up to speed and offer as much support to our teachers as we possibly can. So over the next week and a half, 2 weeks that we have here, that is exactly what we're working on, is putting together the necessary professional development to make this all work as smoothly as possible. And again, to use the terms that have been said here throughout the evening, a very robust distance learning plan to benefit our students.
Yeah, we're really depending on our teachers to help support our teachers. That really is the plan here, is to build on that model. And so we're starting with our 30 expert teachers. We also had another cadre of teachers who are putting together resources that teachers will be able to access at any time on a variety of different subjects, everything from just simply how to use a learning platform to different instructional strategies. So we're really trying to go at it at a multi-pronged approach. It's not terrific to be in our current budgetary climate when we're trying to do things, because we'd always love to do a lot more. But I think we are putting together a program that will be extremely helpful to our teachers. And we're really relying on our professionals to help get that PD out there and to support the teachers throughout not only the first few weeks of opening, but throughout the rest of the school year.
Thank you. Yeah, I think anything that we can do to get some, any extra assistance to the teachers would be appreciated. As for the start of the year, I know I think all schools have special events at the start of the year, whether it's freshman orientation or, the junior class meeting, with the principal and rallies and things of that nature. Is there going to be, or has it been discussed whether we're going to do those virtually, so that Principal Cadenhead welcomes the incoming freshman class en masse on Zoom, or I guess it would be Microsoft Teams, or other types of group video or virtual meetings? Is that something that's been discussed? As well as, let me just throw one more out there, parent-teacher conferences. Are we going to have parent-teacher conferences in the fall? Are they going to be done virtually? Are these types of things being discussed?
Dr. Huber, we are discussing these, but specific to the secondary schools, I know that orientation piece is really important.
Yeah, all the schools are trying to get a handle on exactly how they might progress with this. Originally, when we thought we were coming back to that AB model, for instance, Link Crew was one of the things being talked about, in terms of half the students coming on one day and breaking it basically into two to be able to do social distancing, et cetera. Well, now that that's off the table, then that's where everyone's at now, is what is the next step in terms of how do we facilitate these things in the situation we find ourselves in. So I do expect that we'll see a lot of virtual meetings. I would suspect that parent conferences would definitely go forward using the virtual model. So I think you'll see, especially, the whole idea of building those schedules was how do we try to build in time so that we can connect with kids and parents around all the things you would traditionally find in school, even though we're not in a traditional model. So that's all work that definitely our schools will be digging into as we progress toward the first of the school year.
Okay. What are the expectations for the principals and assistant principals during distance learning? I mean, obviously, assistant principals usually deal with disciplinary issues, and assuming everybody's on, at home, there's probably not going to be a lot of that. Are there, has there been any thought given to what role they're going to be playing in the distance learning environment?
Yeah, the principals have been started the discussion on that currently, and we still anticipate, however, a ton of needed outreach, and I would submit that we're going to need every adult body we can get our hands on in terms of while we're in distance learning, because we will have those students that are struggling. We will have situations come up that will need to be handled, and in certain respects, there'll still be things that are going on the campuses, and so. I see the assistant principals and the counselors playing some real critical roles in terms of helping be kind of the backup team, if you will, in terms of helping teachers connect with kids or helping facilitate interventions, et cetera, with students who are struggling on either a social emotional level or are struggling academically. So I think all of those folks are going to be incredibly busy while we're in a distance learning model.
Okay. With the distance learning platform, will there be an opportunity for the principals to drop in on lessons to observe like they would in a regular year where they would stick their head into a classroom and observe? Will there be that type of accountability where the principals or assistant principals would have that opportunity on this distance learning platform?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yep. That's also one of the things. Assistant principals also assist with that in terms of, they usually assigned at the secondary level to a specific subject areas, et cetera. And so definitely they would be dropping into classrooms for observations throughout the school year.
Okay. Earlier I had, I think it was when Dr. Cassiere was speaking, I had asked whether it would be if teachers would be able to teach from their classrooms, and I understand we're going to be getting that answer fairly shortly. I think it's a great option for teachers, given the resources they have in their classrooms, the access to technology, the access to bandwidth, the access to the office and printers and fill in the blank. I think it's a great opportunity if we're able to do that. But it raises an interesting question, and I know you're working on it, but I do think we do need to seriously think about what we can do to help our teachers in the area of childcare if they have young students. And they want to access their classroom. So, basically exploring the various options. I know that issue has come up and folks are working on that, but I just want to reinforce that would be a very helpful to our teachers if we could find something there.
And I'll just quickly respond that we also agree with that, and we're looking for options, and our community is looking for ways to collaborate with us as well to maybe help us with that piece for our employees and our essential workers. So more to come on that.
Okay, thank you. In the area of mental health, I'm wondering how will our mental health counselors be reaching out to students in need? Or how are the students in need going to be identified in the virtual model? I assume that we can do, at the very least, interventions virtually between the counselors, the mental health counselors, and the students. But ideally, if it's a one-on-one situation, even in person, assuming that the counselor is comfortable with that in-person intervention. But how are we going to be identifying the students for help who are struggling with social, emotional, or mental health issues during the distance learning, and then how are we pairing them up with the counselors?
I think that goes back to the same school structures in terms of the same safety nets, if you will jump into play when we've identified there's a need. And then depending on, the resource needed for that specific need are then deployed, whether it's one of our marriage and family therapists, or it's a different support person. Teachers are our front lines in terms of realizing there might be an issue or concern for a student, except of course when students or parents self-identify a need. So all the safety nets that are normally in play and the normal referral processes will still take place. And then again, in our current situation, probably most of those interactions will have to be done virtually. Whether or not there'd be an opportunity for anything face-to-face, again, I'm sure we'll progress forward with that once we are cleared to do so. But until then, it would be done virtually, I'm assuming.
So, but we will be having those types of identifications, and we will be providing that service.
Absolutely. The goal is to try to get things as normal as possible in a very abnormal situation.
Okay.
So yeah.
We obviously heard a lot about sports just now, but I'd actually kind of curious about like music and theater or extracurricular activities for that matter. But what's the status of our music and theater programs? What kind of outside the box thinking are we doing to perhaps allow for a play or something of that nature, or an orchestra playing? I know we have at many of our high schools outside amphitheaters. In fact, at Folsom High, there's actually not only the outside amphitheater, but it has an outside stage. Is there an opportunity for small theater productions to be put on outside, or even small concerts to be put on outside that is appropriately socially distanced, but it would be outside? And I guess that might be a question for Dr. Cassiere as well, given that you would have more than 5 people presumably, or 10 people at one of these things. But is that something that we're talking about or thinking about? Because it would be really helpful and nice if we could provide those types of opportunities for our bands, our choirs, our string instruments, our actors and actresses.
Right. I can tell you that the music teachers have been getting together and working collaboratively around what would be best practices. They're depending a lot on some of the information that is being shared out by their professional organizations. They're looking to those agencies as well for ideas of how to proceed in the future in our current situation. Back to your point, a portion of this is definitely up to the Department of Health. So I think at this time, there's no way of getting anybody together in any kind of even small group, even socially distanced. It doesn't sound like that's something that we'd be able to do right now. But I've also heard teachers talk about, in fact, I think a bunch of actors just redid The Princess Bride using their cell phones and things around the house that they put together as a way of acting something out. Whether or not our drama production folks could approach something like that. So everyone's trying to be very creative. Everyone's trying to find technology that will allow them to continue forward in terms of teaching music or teaching drama. It's going to look different, again, to get us through this time. But I know our teachers are really interested in engaging their students, just like an English teacher or a math teacher is as well. So everyone's working really hard on how that might look in our new situation.
Well, I would say, if we can, at the very least, have parity between our sports and our acting, our theater and music programs, I think I would appreciate that. Because if we can have athletes get together in pods of 10 to practice, we certainly can get our actors together in pods of 10 to have a play, or our musicians in pods of 10 to have an orchestra show outside. If we can't do that for our for these other programs, then I highly question why we're doing it for our sports. So I would very much like some serious consideration and parity between our sports and our music and our theater programs.
I would completely agree.
And then finally, my final questions actually involve returning to the classroom. I think we didn't really talk a lot about that this evening. And I'd like to maybe hear a little bit more from staff that, let's say in mid-October, we get the positivity rate in Sacramento County is down to 1%. The hospitalizations are for COVID-19 are basically down to zero. How quickly are we going to be able to pivot and return to the classroom? And I know that might differ by grade, but I'm curious. How quickly would we be able to return to the classroom? I am concerned that if things go in a good direction, I want to be optimistic. I understand that it may not turn out that way. The numbers and the science of everything might say, you know what, we're sticking with distance learning, through December. But let's just be optimistic, and let's say something does happen, and where everybody's just so pleased that our positivity rate's down to 1%, and there's no ICU beds that are being used for COVID-19. How quickly can we pivot to in-person education?
I don't know if Dawn wants to take that.
I think it might be a little bit different at the elementary than the secondary. So let's start with elementary first, Curtis.
Certainly, and I couch this answer with foregoing all the other variables that are out there in terms of logistics of physically bringing students back and getting schedules online and on track and going. It could be fairly quick. We aren't dealing with multiple classes and periods moving around a campus. We have one teacher with a group of students, and so the logistics of moving from distance coming back to a virtual, distance to traditional is fairly simple in that they're already going to be paired with their rostered teacher. That is their teacher, those are their students. Now, when I talk about variables, again, in the hypothetical that you laid out, that also has to include where other people in the system are in terms of feeling comfortable coming back. That's the variable that we can't control, or that we won't know until that time comes, and where the world is. And what I mean by that is, and probably the reason that Dr. Huber brought up Dawn coming in from an HR perspective, is that interactive process with where teachers are in terms of their feeling safe to return, regardless of where the numbers are at that time. So from a pure logistics standpoint of bringing students back onto a campus and putting them into their timeframes with their teacher, it's fairly simple and can happen very quickly.
Yeah, at the secondary level, there's a lot more complexity just because of the very nature of the master schedule. And so again, just from what Mr. Wilson was saying, a logistics point of view, probably 7 to 10 days, it would take a master schedule team at a high school or a middle school to really work out the master schedule details of how things would shift and change. But the big variable is the same thing in terms of what teachers then aren't able to come back. And so which teachers would then exit Cordova High School, let's say, and now they're maybe teaching in the virtual academy or something like that. And then, what's the impact, and how do we shuffle those classes, or what teachers need to go back into Cordova to take over the classes that are still there? Also, how many students leave Cordova High School also has an impact. So all those variables have to be taken into account in order to create a master schedule. So to be honest with you, Mr. Reed, I'm not positive how quickly it could be done. I would say probably we'd be looking at a minimum of 12 to 15 days at minimum to make that kind of shift. It's one of the reasons, especially at the secondary level, we're looking at, if we were going to transition, it'd be better to do it at like the semester, or if we do have that longer break, perhaps over the Thanksgiving holidays into the winter, and we're coming back and we're in a situation where we could come back in an AB model or something like that. The more time, the better for the secondary, because it is a massively, you have to sit and do a master schedule to even understand it. It's an amazing undertaking that requires usually 3 to 5 different people working 12, 14 hours a day to get through. So we start our master schedules in a regular year in January, and we usually have them finished around April or May. That's how long a process it takes in a traditional, non-COVID, non-strange year just for a regular master schedule. It's incredibly complex.
And I guess your responses actually prompted one final question from me, which is regarding the virtual academy. I understand that, because we're starting the year in distance learning, that we're not going to launch the virtual academy until conditions allow for us to return to an AB model or some type of model that allows for a hybrid in-person education. And my concern is the disruption to not only the students, but also the teachers. Because if we, in that hypothetical I gave, that we're in mid-October and things are just looking really good, and we decide, all right, we're going to go to the AB model now, we're going to make the pivot, wouldn't the problem be that we would then have to identify some percentage of teachers, and let's say it's 30% of the teachers who decide, hey, you know what, I don't feel comfortable, for whatever various reason, so I want to do the virtual academy. Well, then we would actually be disrupting not only the students who had those 30 teachers who want to do the AB model, we would be shifting them into new teachers mid-year or mid-semester. But the same thing would happen in December. If we did it at mid-semester, a student will have, a teacher for English, let's say in secondary for August through December, and then have an entirely different teacher in January through May. Obviously that's disruptive for both the students and the teachers. So I'm curious if there's been any conversation about starting the virtual academy now, so that we have everybody aligned, because what I'm afraid of is that we're going to get to a point that the answer that in mid-October is, while we could pivot, it's going to be so disruptive, so we're going to stay with virtual academy through December, or that in December, during the December break, we're like, all right, now we can pivot to in-person education, and we're going to hear, well, it's going to still be too disruptive for the students and the teachers, so we're going to just go with virtual learning the entire year. If that ends up happening, that will be a grave disappointment if the numbers allow us to return, but we create a structure that doesn't allow us to pivot to take advantage of those good numbers. So that, I guess that's a statement as well as a bunch of questions, but
there's a lot of pieces to that, Mr. Reed, and I'm going to ask Mr. Ogden to speak to the staffing piece of it, because it's really much more complicated on the backside than what you might see on the front side of it all. Mr. Ogden.
I think both Dr. Huber and Mr. Wilson explained the challenges of staffing very well, and making a transition is difficult, much more difficult than secondary. So anticipating a change at mid-year or at a term is the natural change. So if you have 3 or 4 weeks prior to that in secondary, I think that change can be rather as smooth as expected, would be in that time frame. I think elementary could change really at any time, and elementary, when it changes or when secondary changes, what would happen is we would need to go through an interactive process with our staff, because some staff may not be able or willing to come back to in-person teaching. And we've already started that process. Mr. Shepard, who's in my department, he's director, has done over 100 interactive meetings already, preparing for that inevitable day that we're all looking forward to when we all get to go back in the classrooms. So if we look at that sort of an outlier program, creating a new virtual academy, because we don't have that right now, that would be a brand new school. If we staff that right now, the question would be, how would we staff a new school? And we may just, there's many ways we could do that. If we staff that school during a transition, we would have a lot of candidates, because as we go through this interactive process, we have staff members that aren't able or willing to go back to in-person instruction. So we would have a cadre of teachers who would be able to go in and take that assignment. And then we would also have families in the same boat who would be looking at going back in person and say, well, we're not able or willing to go back at this time. And they would be the students that would fill up. And so we would do as much as we could, an even match of teachers and students moving. So I think if we do that now, we're going to do it twice. If we wait until the transition happens, we do it once. So I think perhaps doing it when the transition happens, it's probably less disruptive than doing it now and then doing it again, because we will still have to do it again when we go back.
All right.
And hopefully that's
Thank you very much for those. And I guess just in closing, I would just, anything we can do to allow for that pivot when that day comes to be as seamless and easy as possible. Obviously, and I'm sure you're doing it, but think about it now rather than potentially being surprised when that day comes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Greatly appreciate your questions. Now, Mr. Hoover.
Okay, thank you. So just to most of my questions as we've gone through here, I did have a question about what is the situation with, classes that involve science labs, for example, or our career technical education opportunities. Are we essentially putting those on hold? Or are we going to be able to, what are we going to be able to do about those in the meantime?
So,
Okay.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you to address that because I know you've been working with the departments on that.
Yeah, much like, music and drama in our electives, those teachers are also in the same situation in terms of addressing that. In science, we are looking at virtual labs and ways that we can do things even in the virtual environment that will still meet the requirements of the subject area and the standards that need to be covered. In terms of CTE, the same thing in terms of, what are best practices for covering the materials and giving kids experiences, even if they can't literally be in the classroom hands-on with, whatever the product is or the tool is that they would normally use. So I'm not sure we have all the answers to that yet, but that's exactly where the focus is currently in terms of moving forward so that kids still have meaningful and rich experiences in those classes to the fullest extent possible in our current environment.
Thanks. And I know it's obviously more of a challenge because it's stuff that's harder to do virtually.
Absolutely.
It's actually sad that we were going to have this CTE building at Folsom High ready for the new year and not going to be able to take advantage of it quite yet. But I think that's most of my questions. I do just want to say a couple things about, I want to echo a lot of the questions and comments that Mr. Reed put out there. I think it's really important not to lose sight of the fact that the priority should still be returning to the classroom, and I understand the challenges for secondary. But honestly, the challenges for families, especially working parents, most of that is going to be at the elementary level. And given that elementary is easier to pivot to an in-person instruction, I would definitely hope that we would, at the very least, if we're not willing to shift secondary mid-semester, which I understand the challenges with that, at the very least consider shifting elementary mid-semester if that is a possibility, depending on if we get taken off the watch list in the county, because I think that is really where a lot of the pressure for childcare and a lot of the struggles for working families is going to be, are those kids that you can't leave home alone, especially. So I would definitely encourage that. Also, I know we're still waiting on some information about special education, but I still, think the board has said previously that I think we really need to get our special ed students, at least provide them the option to have in-person learning right off the bat, obviously safely. And I do think the last thing I would say, I was looking over, it kind of threw me a little bit earlier when the protocols for reopening were put up there. I know the 14-day watch list requirement is there by the state, but I brought up the state requirements again, the California Department of Public Health, just to check on that surveillance testing thing, and it is a recommendation, not a requirement. So I think it's important that, the state guidelines talk about, wanting to recommending surveillance testing as local capacity allows, as practicable. I think these are things we definitely need to aim for. They are not requirements though, and we need to be really careful that we're not creating new barriers for reopening, that we're following the health guidelines and the health requirements as best that we can and meeting those requirements. But I don't think we should be putting additional barriers in the way for getting back to the classroom. But thanks for the work that was put into this presentation and for all the answers to my questions tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover. Any other questions from the board?
Mr. Clark, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello. Okay. Thank you. Can we elaborate a little bit more on the secondary schedules? Don't we already have secondary schedules? What is the challenge to pivot that relates to the schedules? Is it because teachers would want to move out of would not want to move back to the classroom that creates the challenge? Or what is the major hurdle for the schedule portion?
Yeah, unless, we were somehow, we had the vaccine or something and it was going to be, pretty much 100% safe. That is the major piece in terms of, which teachers were now not be part of Folsom High School's master schedule and which students would not be part of it. And that would have a huge impact on the numbers and, whether or not sections would have to be collapsed. It would be enormous. But that is the main crux of the issue.
An additional issue would be credentialing. In elementary, all the teachers have the same credential. So you could replace a kindergarten teacher with a fifth grade teacher, not that you'd want to, but I mean, that is an option. You can't replace a math teacher with a PE teacher in the second grade.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciated Mr. Reed's question about the virtual academy and why we chose to have the model for all these students in distant learning and then going into virtual if we return to the classroom. So I appreciated that explanation. How are we prepared to handle assessing our returning students and trying to gauge the possibility of learning loss from last spring, especially at the elementary level?
It took a while to come on there. We are definitely working on that. That is one of the things that we are trying to solve and how to best to assess. Typically, our teachers, when our students start the school year, we start off with assessments right off the bat, and on top of just our normal protocols when we start teaching in the beginning of the school year, we have it's also a requirement in the plan due to the state on how we're going to mitigate the learning loss. So that is what some of our the cadre of teachers that we are bringing in next week are going to be working on, along with every teacher that's on their mind right now of how we're going to assess and then again mitigate. Looking back at those schedules, you'll see that the afternoon is a lot of asynchronous time for the elementary schedules, which also allows time for small group instruction to work with the kids who need extra. So that is part of the plan.
Okay, and can you remind people, I think there might be still some confusion about what asynchronous could look like and what it is compared to the other one. I think Dr. Huber gave a pretty good explanation that synchronized is when we're in person, but right. I think there still might be some confusion about the other component.
Right, asynchronous is typically think of it as a recording of a lesson that is not live. I wouldn't be able to stop and ask the instructor a question. It's pre-recorded with content that was structured and set up and then recorded and then sent out to students. That's typically the best definition of asynchronous, and where a student could access that information at any time from anywhere. It doesn't have to be, it's not that live in person. So some of the things that we listed in types in asynchronous would be some physical education pre-recording, some if we preemptively front load the social studies lesson, then we can send out the lesson, and then again in our schedules for elementary we talked about preview and review, and that would be, hey kids, today when you turn on this video you're going to learn about A, B, and C, and then the next day, what did you learn about A, B, and C? Let's talk about that. Again, trying to build those connections between those asynchronous during the synchronous time. But again, this is we're going to be relying on our experts and our teachers to decide what is best delivered through an asynchronous and what is best delivered through synchronous.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Ranking. Any other questions from the board?
Mr. President, I do. It's just I really like all the questions. I don't want to be repetitive. I think the board's asking all the right questions right now, and the staff, I was really encouraged by the programs, and it looks like it's coming together. I know there's still a lot more work to do. It's a moving target, so I'm really optimistic that we're going to find a solution here, and it's going to be a whole lot better than it was when we went into the crisis mode. But one of my questions, and one of my concerns, is the equity issue, the digital divide. I know the governor was talking about, internet access is not just a luxury anymore; it's really a right for the kids and the kids and the families that don't have a voice over here that have been impacted most, like Latinos at 4 to 1 and Black African Americans, and it's definitely at the essential worker level. Is there anything we're going to do, or any type of money coming down the pipe that we provide internet access that will relieve this digital divide, that free internet, or something that we could do for the kids at risk that don't have those things? I know that's still, I heard earlier that there's maybe they can't even turn on the video because they don't have the bandwidth. That's a big concern, and that creates that digital divide for the inequities that we're going to have on the kids and families that have those type of challenges. Is there anything that we see or forthcoming that might help that reduce that digital divide?
Mr. Wilson, do you want to address that, what we're doing through Pat Moyen and her team with David Stone?
Yeah, absolutely. And we agree. And I felt that was one of our strengths last year in March was really assessing the needs of our students in terms of special devices. I will admit that the internet posed a struggle, and due to the fact that the entire state was looking for internet access at the same time. But what we were able to do was really, and we'll continue to do this, is to assess the needs of our students and families. And we do have some solutions. One, in terms of devices first. ETIS, as always, is doing a phenomenal job of preparing for the needs of all of our students. So if there are still devices that are needed, we did not do a recollection in many of the schools right now because we knew that students would still be accessing educational items throughout the summer. And so many of our students still have their Chromebooks in their possession. And we are prepared to do another wave of Chromebook distribution at the beginning of school, along with the other materials, as our student board member brought up earlier this evening. That'll be part of that distribution. On top of that, there's been a lot of talk through the state regarding internet access, like you brought up, and we also have some tools at our disposal to make sure that once we assess the family needs and identify the families that are in need of that we're going to try our best to do that. On top of that, the state, our governor speaks to this at length on a regular basis when he talks about educational needs, and looking to do exactly what you had brought up was looking at our the neighborhoods that most have a need for that internet access, and working with all entities around the state so that it doesn't truly fall fully on a district to try and solve that problem. But it is a concern, and it is one that we are trying to tackle to the best of our ability right now.
Yeah, if we don't do that, the inequities will continue to grow, and those kids will still fall behind. So
correct.
Whatever you can do to identify those kids and bring them forward for us to learn quickly, and it comes up to issue when we start talking budget. We're probably going to need more devices and more money, and hopefully we're going to see some of that federal money and state money to help us offset for the COVID relief. So that's what we're praying for, and hopefully we'll be able to provide the resources to eliminate that. So thank you. I think that's what I have right now, but I'm really pleased with the staff and what you're doing. Keep up the good work. We're going to get through this together, folks, but this is a very serious virus, and we got to take it seriously. So we're going to find our way, and we're going to get kids back to school as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Just a couple of final questions, and maybe Curtis can answer this one for me. The asynchronous education, can the students do it on their own time, like perhaps in the evening with family? I mean, with parents helping out, especially if they get home from work and they're kind of stuck on it, or does it have to happen in that classroom setting?
So the asynchronous is absolutely designed to be able to be delivered at any time from anywhere. So that again, it's not that live interaction. So it's not that I have to be here during that time to talk to you and ask you a question. You'll be recorded, or the content will be recorded, so that the student, again, like you said, if I work better at 8 o'clock at night, once my family is back home, I can sign on and do it at that point.
Okay, perfect. And I know we looked at a couple of platforms. Did we look at anything else as far as, I know we looked at the Seesaw, but I'm talking about the other grades, and I think we use it at I think we use it at Walnutwood. Alex, have we looked at that software at all?
So I'll let Dr. Huber speak a little bit to that. Some of those platforms are specific to curriculum. So we've looked at all those, and we've utilized a lot of those, and we'll continue to. And Alex specific definitely is not an elementary software, so right. If Dr. Huber wants to pop in, but those platforms that we have been using will continue to be used as well in terms of specific curriculum delivery methods. The topic tonight, the proposal tonight was about more of a document management platform, such as Schoology was solved that purpose for us last year. And then what was proposed tonight was Seesaw and Google to handle that portion of it rather than curriculum specific delivery.
Okay. And then I had one more question, and a parent had asked me this last week. What are the students to do about PE?
So I believe, so a couple things. Number one, PE, we have PE teachers across the district, and they will be scheduled in their PE lessons for secondary schools. I'm sure it'll be, if they are a period 5 PE teacher, they're going to have their class roster to them. Our PE teachers did a phenomenal job from March all the way through the end of the year, providing movement lessons for our students and really getting creative with their movement lessons. I watched several of the PE lessons for elementary last year, and that will continue. And that's one of those things that we've been discussing, doing some asynchronous work for PE lessons for grade bands, such as lessons appropriate for a K-3 student, and there's lessons appropriate for 4th and 5th grade students. That also will allow those teachers, once those recordings are made, to be able to do synchronous lessons as well at schools. Between our itinerant PE teachers that we have across the elementary, they will be able to pair up with schools, just like they do during our normal time, and be responsible for popping in and meeting those students and delivering those lessons as well in the synchronous model.
All right, thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that there were some hands raised. I do want to entertain the public comment, and there they are, 13. Do we have any more? Great. I will cap it at 20, just in case a few more people jump on. You will have 2 minutes, so let's entertain those comments right now.
I'll start with the first one, Mr. Clark. I'm going to unmute Debbie.
Good evening, Debbie.
Hi, board members, Dr. Koligian. I just want to take a few minutes to answer some of the questions that you've asked from a teacher perspective. Right now, we're feeling like we're still in crisis planning stage. We have 3 weeks until the beginning of school, and we didn't know the platforms until tonight when you found them out. Our curriculum delivery, we're not sure of, our materials, our safety plan for being on campus. Some teachers need to access classrooms to teach with materials in place. FCEA has not seen a safety plan agreed upon by the district or union because the district feels it does not pertain to the beginning of the school year with online learning. We are in constant crisis preparation. Teachers do not operate well in crisis mode. We need structures to answer questions for students and families. We need planning, training, a safe school to return with needed materials, teaching opportunities, teaching bandwidth needs met for our families, etc. Our bargaining team created a robust plan to return to online learning with a plan on making the school safe for return. We're giving plenty of time for a turnaround. We need to prepare now for the future and cannot wait for crisis mode to put things into effect soon. We need to have the ability to get materials for students to use away from the computers pediatricians recommend. Too much screen time is not healthy for students. Students need activities away from the screen. FCUSD is a print shop teachers rely upon for materials. It is not up and running because of the pandemic, and materials are not at a local Kinko's printing to meet the needs for beginning school. FCEA's well thought out plan for reopening schools was annihilated and given back with a thank you for your hard work statements, but this language is already law or is needed at a later time. We don't need it for online learning. FCUSD does not need to address campus safety. We can't put it off until.
I'm sorry, Debbie, your time had elapsed. Who do we have next?
Next, we have Rob.
Good evening, Rob.
Good evening, board members and Dr. Collegian. This is Rob Thomas speaking on behalf of CSEA and your classified employees. There are many people attending tonight's meeting that may not be familiar with the term classified employees. We're not the teachers and we're not the administrators. We're the 1,000 other district employees that keep the district functioning. We're the instructional assistants, the custodians, the bus drivers, the mechanics, the clerical staff, the technicians, the food service workers, and so many other folks that help keep the district functioning. We understand that distance learning and the numerous other challenges we face related to COVID-19 will produce dramatic disruption in the way we operate. This disruption will require great flexibility so we can effectively support our students. That's why CSEA and the district are working on a memorandum of understanding to provide administrators with flexibility to meet these challenges. This collaboration will strengthen our partnership as we move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Who do we have next?
Next, we have Matt.
Good evening, Matt.
Hi, my name is Matt Medlin, and my son Lucas is 7 years old, and he's going into the 2nd grade this year at Russell Ranch Elementary. I see a lot of things on this call, on this board meeting that pertain to regular students, neurotypical students, but not enough is really being done for special needs students. I know y'all are waiting on guidance from the state, but you put all this stuff together for all these regular students. And I have to tell you that distance learning does not work for autism. Agreement with board member Hoover, in which he says that autistic children, special needs children of all types, should be able to come back to the school first and have that in-person learning. Because while y'all are sitting there worried about social isolation, I can sit here and write a trilogy of books that would be better than the Lord of the Rings about social isolation. Us autism parents and the autistic children are well versed in that subject, believe me. So distance learning is what y'all want to do, but how are you going to make sure that my child is not left behind? Because right now, he is being left behind. And when the school year got cut short and everybody went home, he got left behind even more because they would send me these long emails of things to do for speech therapy. I'm not a speech therapist. I don't know how to teach. I don't have the ability to do these things. And so what happens for our special needs children when they don't get the schooling and the education that they need is not the same as what happens to regular kids. And I'm timing it. I got 20 seconds left. Regular kids, yeah, they'll have social issues, they'll have emotional issues, but our children, they become more autistic. Their symptoms get worse. They regress, and with it, their freedom lessens. That's all I have. They need a champion on the board. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Greatly appreciate it. Who do we have next?
Next, Mr. Clark, we have Jen.
Good evening, Jen.
Hi. I didn't think it was possible to be more displeased with how our district is planning and rolling out distance learning until I started listening to this meeting tonight. The personnel making these decisions are so far removed from the classroom, it's embarrassing to hear y'all speak. The schedules that have been assembled are insane and don't allow for students who have both parents working in or outside of the home to be able to do their lessons. You are trying to make distance learning look and feel like traditional school, and that is impossible. It is extremely unfair to rely on us teachers to do training and planning while not being paid. It is impossible to be ready for school to start on August 12th when we return on August 10th. Furthermore, not all teachers have the technology to pull off distance learning, and most of us are not willing to purchase more materials for us to do our job. You are expecting us to teach curriculum online, and the district hasn't provided an ounce of training on how to teach online and what the best practices are. I plead for you to provide training and planning for staff during August and start school with students after Labor Day. Anything less sets us teachers up for failure with your expectations and the expectations of parents. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. I greatly appreciate your comments. Who do we have next?
Next, we have Anthony.
Good evening, Anthony.
Hey, gang. Tony Ruiz from Vista here. I want to say just two quick things, and then I want to read the rest of Debbie Kukurian's statement. First of all, I want to thank the majority of the board for really trying to think of everybody's health and well-being and not trying to propagate their own personal political propaganda. The second point I want to make is this whole switch to Microsoft Teams. Where did this come from? Those of us that were in the crisis teaching of last year forced ourselves to become acquainted with Zoom. We were comfortable with Zoom. The students were comfortable with it. And then all of a sudden, after I know the majority of people who responded to the district survey said we were comfortable with Zoom, everything was working really well for us with that. And now all of a sudden we're being told that we're moving to Microsoft Teams. That just seems to be it's just mind-numbing. Don't ask us our opinion if you're just going to tell us what to use. It's really kind of a slap in the face. And now I just want to read the rest of Debbie Kukurian's statement. Teachers are tired of crisis management. We have come up with solutions to prepare for next year. We need training, parent coaches and teachers, safe schools for returning to work on materials to gather and an assurance that our students will have curriculum supports to meet their needs. We know from research online learning is flexible and meant to occur individually. The state is requiring the learning continuity and attendance plan to be developed with community, parents, teachers, classified, to address the disparity of learning which occurred last year. No one is pulling groups together to address that need. We have had all summer. We're still waiting for answers. We've seen many districts with answers. FCA has given answers which have been mostly rejected. We are told that our answers are in the law, yet we have not seen any paperwork developed, parent usage forms made, technology platforms disclosed, curriculum supports purchased, state time accountability sheets, and more. We've had 3 weeks to go and nothing tangible in place. We are being set up to be thrown to.
Thank you, Tony. I greatly appreciate it. Who do we have next?
Next, we have Laurette.
Laurette, good evening.
Good evening and hello, everybody. I want to first of all thank you for caring about our health and going on with distance learning. I couldn't be more happy. I think that we are ready and willing to do a really rigorous program. I know my team is working really, really hard right now, and I'm very excited about what we're coming up with. I wanted to just ask you one thing, and you don't have to answer it now, obviously, but about the Microsoft Teams. One of the problems we had last year why we didn't use it was because it was impossible to do breakout groups. I hear you're working with them to be able to get what we need. So can you please include breakout groups? Because we have a very rigorous PLC program going on at our school, and all our kids belong to all of us. And we want to be able to get them in those different sections where they're going to get the most help they can get from the right teacher who needs to communicate with them. And with breakout groups, we're allowed to do that. So just consider that with the Microsoft Teams, because that's going to be very important to us. The only other thing I just wanted to mention while I have you is, I know we're talking about coming back as soon as we can, and some of us can and some of us can't. But wouldn't it be easier to just keep us at one program for a certain amount of time, like by trimester? I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know if it's something that could work, but if we just said we're doing this for this trimester and then we're going to reevaluate, then we're not going to worry about having to move kids around because we're going to a different kind of model. Just a suggestion. Thank you for everything you're doing. I really appreciate you. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. And who do we have next?
Next, we have Jeanette.
Jeanette, good evening.
Jeanette, can you try unmuting yourself, please?
Jeanette, you
Try that again. I'm sorry. There you go.
I got it unmuted.
There you go. You're ready.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Jeanette Sandsmock, and tonight I'm actually speaking to you as a fourth grade teacher from San Jose Gallardo. Thank you, board, for taking the time to review all ideas and possible alternatives to this school year. However, I do have a few concerns. On the same path as Mr. Reed stated, if the district is going to implement the waiver, and it sounds like you, the board, are very interested, would it not be a logical choice to start the year with students who are enrolling in the virtual academy to start the virtual academy? It is illogical to start young students with one teacher and 3 to 4 weeks later move them to another teacher. Students and parents are already have anxiety about this process. Why make it harder? Additionally, it would allow specialist teachers to adjust their schedules now rather than do it on the fly over a few days or in a week. By allowing the virtual academy to start at the beginning of the year is seamless and makes it continuous with the same teacher with the same group of students. Please consider this option. Secondly, all the training that was mentioned. When is this happening? We start back on August 12th. We are not coming back until August 10th because we do not have safe environment to enter the classroom until that day. How are we going to learn new platforms, learn how to help students use their devices, learn best practices for distance learning, and still plan for the year? I am very concerned that we are going to open this year in a confused, chaotic, and stressful environment. Please allow teachers to use any platform that we are comfortable with and start paid virtual training before the August 10th date so that we can be the professionals we are. Lastly, how are guest teachers being handled? We have not heard anything about how guest teachers and distance learnings are going to work. Do we have a plan for that? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Next, Mr. Clark, we have Ahit. Oh.
Yeah, hi, this is Ajit Vaidya, and I just wanted to say appreciated the board's decision last week to vote for the full distance learning for the year. I guess, and by the same token, that's going to be less disruptive, I think, for everybody to start in that model. I think it was clear to me that implementing the multiple different kinds of hybrid models is just very confusing, unimplementable in many ways. And I feel that a lot of the discussion here today is about if we meet these criteria, then we could go back to some hybrid model or the virtual academy. But I think there's a lot of us out here who, even though we don't like the idea of distance learning, nobody likes it. We just feel more safe. And if we meet some of these targets, 5% transmission or whatever, we still don't feel comfortable about sending our kids back to school. So I just feel like echoing, I think, what somebody else mentioned earlier is that, we should, if we're going to go, we should either go all virtual for a significant amount of time and just make sure we do it right, or come back fully when we're good and ready. This in-between thing does not seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. It just feels like we'll come back and then cases will go back up, and then 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, we'll have to shut back down. And to me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I would like, for people to consider that perhaps as unpalatable as distance learning is for a lot of us, it may be the best option, and to carry it through for the whole semester, if not the entire school year. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next, Mr. Clark, we have CK.
Good evening, CK.
CK, can you try unmuting yourself, please? There we are. You may proceed, CK.
Good evening, sir.
Are you there?
Is he with us?
The microphone is on, but they're not responding.
Okay,
Shall
let's go to the next one.
Okay, the next is Jennifer.
Good evening, Jennifer.
Hello, board and attendees of the meeting. First off, I wanted to let you know that obviously I think that we all understand the difficult situation that we're in. And I do appreciate the board's thoughtful effort that's been spent with regards to putting together, the challenge of putting together a solution. But I have three pretty basic questions that I'm hoping that could be answered. Not trying to be insensitive of some of the difficulty that we're going through right now with all of the challenges. But first off, I'd like to understand if families are going to be expected to print out any materials this school year, because I think that would be a pretty significant challenge for families. Second, if I understood correctly, we will be having normal grading system this year, and I'd like to know if that's accurate. And then third, I find it difficult to imagine that we'd be returning to school in November, which is the start of the flu season. So if we are only moving over at a semester, would this mean that we would do distance learning for the entire year?
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm hoping that staff is taking notes and we'll be able to answer those questions via it on our website, or I don't know, to reach out to you, Jennifer, if you'd like to send us your name or your information. We'll make sure that we get those answered. Who do we have next?
Next, Mr. Clark, we have Carrie.
Good evening, Carrie.
Hi, thank you. I just had a couple comments. I appreciate the scheduling for all the different levels and all, but I wasn't quite sure what the minutes, Curtis, on this was, like asynchronous, synchronous, or synchronous, the 230 minutes for the first through third. I know I saw something like that on the high school schedule, but I didn't see what our breakdown for elementary first through third was. And even though I understand that the kids can, go run around the living room when we're in class, they can go dark, but it's still they're on their device. I'm going to be on my device. And if some of the students have a kindergarten and a second grader and a fourth grader, there's going to be 3 devices and they're going to be running around, and I don't know how that's going to work. But if I knew the breakdown, then I wouldn't feel as bad if I was making sure I had the minutes. Someone already mentioned the Microsoft Teams. We did not go there. And then combo classes. I don't know if that's a concern. And even though like the lessons would be 15 to 20 minutes, we still need the kids involved to do the review or the guided practice. Then they do independent. So they're still going to be on screen. So that's my main thing, is there is still going to be a lot of screen time unless we specifically know how the minutes will be distributed. So again, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Carrie. Greatly appreciate it.
Next, Mr. Clark, we have Rachel.
Rachel, good evening, ma'am.
Rachel, can you try unmuting yourself? There you go.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, Rachel, good evening.
Great. Good evening. My name's Rachel. I'm the parent of 2 elementary children, one of which is going into kindergarten, and my husband and I work full time. This plan adopted, it really relies on the parents of kids, particularly elementary or special needs kids. It relies on a parent to stay home and facilitate distance learning, and that's a huge, huge challenge. I don't know how parents are going to do that, particularly those who have to, go into work. And I've listened during, to this meeting, and it seems like it is the board fully intends that school instruction resume on August 12th. I don't know why. What I've heard during this meeting is that staff is still working on logistical issues. Staff cannot conclusively answer if teachers are ready and trained to implement distance learning. We know that teachers don't feel ready. We don't even know the basic information, like who our kids' teachers will be. We don't know if anybody has given consideration to any types of orientation that could be given by teachers or by principals. There's been absolutely no discussion of student care, which is critical for families where the parents work. We don't know what to tell our kids, what the school is going to look like. I was trying to explain this to my kindergartner, and I just couldn't do it. I don't understand why school needs to start on August 12th when teachers and parents are not ready. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rachel. Who do we have next?
Mr. Clark, I'm going to give CK another try, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
CK, are you there? Hello, are you there? Okay, we'll move on.
All right.
Next, we have Kristen.
Kristen, good evening.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, Kristen.
Okay. So when board member Hoover talks about the importance of having special education students on campus, he implies about having mod severe students on campus. But what about our mild mod special education students? Is their disability not as important? My mild mod student was left behind just as much as any other special education student was. And what about the special education teachers? Is their safety not as important as other teachers? This concept of mod severe students on campus is not fair, not only for special education teachers, but is not equitable to other special education students whose disability is just as important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Mr. Clark, we have Chelsea.
Chelsea, good evening.
Hi, my name is Chelsea Ulrich, and I am a preschool special education teacher. We are a small cohort of teachers and students. There's 11 students in the district, but I think that we also deserve consideration and planning in this. Special education deserves definitely more than one slide with 2 sentences on it. I think that if sports can have their own presentation, special education should as well. It's not just extracurricular, it's the students and the teacher's livelihood at the same time. So that's kind of basically what I said or want to say. We can't just be lumped into, TK and K at the same time. We often don't get much consideration, we feel, in special education, either from the district or special education department, is me speaking from myself. So that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Mr. Clark, we have Tabitha.
Tabitha, good evening.
Hey, good evening, guys. Thank you very much for Dr. Casserier, Ms. Kay, of course, our FCUSD staff and our board members, especially to our student board member, Ms. Gallant, for asking the right questions from a student perspective and holding students accountability during this distance learning discussion. With the current COVID situation, 100% distance learning is the right thing to do, even though it is difficult. I am concerned with 3 areas, though, that I've heard. The first area is the switch over to Microsoft Teams platform for over 20,000 K through 12 students, plus about approximately 1,000 staff members. I do see that even in our current board meeting right now, we are on Zoom. Are there additional training for our, not just for our teachers, but for our students and also their supportive families, especially the ESL students? How will FCUSD provide effective ramp up and access to those families? And how can our community help to leverage that gap if the switch over is the decision? Second portion of it is, FCUSD board needs to make this 100% distance learning from a trimester or semester planning purpose. The switch in the middle is very difficult. I'm not understanding why this district is not leveraging the online platforms like Apex that's already established the curriculum and have our teachers teach from there, from a synchronous or asynchronous lesson, and supplement with their expertise and with their packets or their homework for that student connections. It'll be a lot easier to transition from hybrid to virtual with the same consistent curriculum. And then the third is I am concerned with the teachers and principals not having enough time to ramp. 3 non-instructional days at this point is just not enough. They're already dialing in, they're planning, they're ramping up, and they're training on their off time. They're not paid. This is their time to be with their families as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Right.
Sorry, Mr. Clark. Next we have Mijal. And I'm sorry
Mijal?
if I didn't say that right.
Hi, this is actually Mikhail's wife, Angela Bayer, and I'm a parent of 2 elementary school students in the district. And I may have missed this, so I apologize if I did, but I just wanted a bit more information about what the difference will be for distance learning for the traditional schools, so the schools that our children are currently enrolled in, versus enrollment into the virtual academy, which I understand will be something separate. So I just wanted to know if we could have more information about what that looks like, that actually is the case, that there will be distance learning, which may switch. And I like this proposal of either doing trimesters or semesters so that teachers and other staff are able to plan. So if we could just have a bit more information about that. And I also do think that it's important to consider whether use will be made, like the last participant said, of existing online learning platforms. So I know that online schools do exist. I would prefer to keep working with the district I live in to support the district and all of your efforts that you're making. So I'm wondering whether that will also be considered. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, who do we have?
Next we have JB.
JB.
Hi. Sorry. I'm a substitute teacher and a parent of a high school student at Vista. First of all, thank you for your hard work with these difficult decisions. I'd like to address that period of time after we come off the governor's watch list, but before we go into our transitional learning model, that period of time where we're still engaged in virtual learning, but we have some flexibility from the governor. I think the district needs to strongly consider some in-person options that can be offered, not just for the special education classes, but for any class. I encourage you to allow teachers to meet with students in smaller pods. Maybe this could take place on campus, or perhaps there's some something that's more localized at a park or other public space to address some of the transportation issues that some families may have. Again, this is something that should be addressed for all classes. It would be an enormous benefit to keeping the students engaged with their teachers and engaged in learning. Also, this kind of FaceTime could help mitigate some of the issues and difficulties that we've been discussing about pivoting to the transitional model. I ask that you please give schools and teachers flexibility in allowing them to have some real FaceTime while practicing some real social distancing. Not the kind of social distancing that we've got in our transitional model that requires hundreds of students to cross paths with dozens of teachers each day, but instead, real social distancing, but also with real FaceTime. These kinds of outside of the box solutions will require flexibility at the school level. Please give the schools that kind of flexibility to move forward. And
Thank you. I'm sorry your time has elapsed. Who do we have next?
Mr. Clark, these will be the last 4. The next one is Lucinda.
Lucinda, good evening.
Lucinda, can you try unmuting yourself, please? There you go.
Hello, can you hear me now? Okay, great. Hello, Mr. Clark. It's nice to see you. Thanks for all your work. I know you've all been working over the summer. So I'm a parent of 2 children in the district, and I'm also a parent on your community advisory committee for special education. I have a couple of points that I wanted to talk to you about. One is for kindergarten. I see that the kindergartners have quite a bit of screen time. They seem to have fewer breaks than the children just older than them in grade school, and so I wondered why that was. They had longer blocks of screen time, and they're younger children, and it's harder for them. So I'd like it if you could look into that and see why that is. The other thing that I noticed is that, well, it's a question that I carried over from the springtime. If you have children with one-to-one aides, what happens to these aides during this time where teachers are providing online instruction? Where does this human resource go? Are they available to help our children, especially if they're assigned to our special education children? The other thing is about therapies. How are therapies going to be provided to our children? There are other options. Children receive speech therapy online from private providers. Is that going to be an option for our children? What about occupational therapy? Could it be held outside? What are the options for our children who have therapies as part of their IEPs? Also, I noticed that you had a lot of synchronous learning. Why is that? Why not more recorded learning so children with ADHD can watch or rewatch the lessons and things of that nature? Because it's really hard for a child with ADHD to sit for 1, 2, 3 hours and do lessons online. So those are some of my thoughts.
Okay, Lucinda, I got you. I heard you, and we'll be chatting soon. Thank you so much.
Next,
Who do we have next? Who do we have next? Are we there? Are we there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Nicole.
Hi. All right, good evening, guys. My name is Nicole Harlow. I actually work with a wide range of students in the Folsom Cordova School District. I'm not a teacher there, but I work with them on a extracurricular basis. I've been working all summer with a lot of the students who we felt might have fallen a little bit through the gaps after the chaos learning.
Looks like you muted yourself there, Nicole.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Nope, you're muted. You're muted again. Can we try to unmute Miss Harlow? Are we there? There you are, Nicole. Ah.
I'm not sure what she's doing, Mr. Clark.
There she is. Nicole?
Hello.
Okay, she keeps muting herself. Nicole, we got you. We'll go on to the next comment, but I got you. We'll come back to you. All right, who do we have? Are we hitting a glitch here?
Martha, are you there?
Yes, we are here. Who do we have?
I'm not sure if we lost.
Hello. This is Nicole again. It says I'm unmuted.
Okay, let's go, Nicole.
I don't know what's happening. It says the host is muting me, but I know you guys aren't, so I don't know. It's a glitch, probably. Okay, as I was saying, sorry about that. And I've been working with these students all throughout the summer online, and I can tell you that a lot of the elementary grade students are having a very difficult time sitting for even a 30-minute Zoom call. They're constantly getting up and running away, and that's just in their nature. And my concern is also on the end of the teachers. If they're having to sit there and try to keep 20, 30 kids corralled at their computer screens, that's also going to be a concern. And I just feel like it's going to be a very frustrating situation for everyone, not a positive learning environment. So I would definitely have to echo what a lot of people are saying with the more of the asynchronous situation, allowing students to have the ability and the flexibility to split up their learning throughout the day, get more outside time, maybe less screen time. I know you also brought that up yourself, President, and it's like, I feel like the screen time, while it may be great for structure, it's not going to be the greatest thing for actual positive learning, getting that outside experience time. I know this is a weird situation we're in and we got to make the best of it, but I'm just thinking in terms of the healthiest relationship that we can try and maintain between the parents, the teachers, and the students, especially because a lot of those younger kids that suffer from maybe some ADHD struggles and stuff are going to need their parents to sit there by their side the whole time during class, and that's just going to create another burden on the families. So I know I got to speak a little longer, so I'll go ahead and wrap it up. But thank you guys so much for your time, and have a great night.
All right, Nicole, thank you. Who do we have next?
Mr. Clark, I'm sorry about that. For some reason, my laptop decided to mute itself.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, next is Jane.
Jane.
Hi.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening. I would like to say that I'm happy that it sounds like you're going to be flexible with teachers teaching either in their classroom or at home based on the teacher's needs. And I really hope that it stays that way. However, I do wish that you'd be more flexible with teaching styles. I don't think daily live interaction was really meant to be the students behind a screen for as long as we're proposing. And it feels almost stalkerish that individual practice time be synchronous. Granted, when this is done in the classroom, I'm always present. I don't understand why students couldn't pop into these Microsoft Teams, sorry, brand new. I forgot the terminology already. Why they can't just pop into Microsoft Teams and I can take roll based on them popping in or asking questions or messaging me or completing an assignment that day. Why it has to be taking roll during these Microsoft Team meetings. It almost seems that taking roll that way is going to be punitive for students that are watching younger siblings and making sure that they're doing their work. So again, I wish that we could provide a more flexible way in order to teach these students that's not as synchronous, because our synchronous minutes outshine our asynchronous minutes. One concern I do have that's never been brought up is our assessment concerns. We talk about needing grades, and I'm surprised it hasn't been brought up nearly as much in this meeting as it has in the previous time. However, there's no way for me to accurately assess students without assuming that they're on their watch or on an app or opening another window and Googling this. Normally in the classroom, there's specific strict testing environments. Students put their backpacks in the front of the classroom. We make sure that they're not playing with their phone underneath their desk, and I'm concerned about how I'm supposed to assess the students in distance learning, and I would like to be trained on that more officially. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And who do we have next?
Our 20th hand, Mr. Clark, is Jessica.
Jessica, good evening.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just have a few comments. First, I just want to thank President Clark and Mr. Hoover and Mr. Reed. I've sent several emails, and you three have consistently emailed me back with my concerns, so I really appreciate that, especially as a mom of 3 kids in this district. My first concern, and a lot have talked about it, is screen time. Like I said, I'm a mother of 3. I think I'm in the minority when it comes to allowing my kids screen time and gaming. I usually try to keep it capped at 1 hour a day of screen time, even during this pandemic, because I feel they are better being outside kicking a ball than being on a screen. With this new distance learning, which I know we don't really have a choice right now, I am concerned about that for my own kids. And I just don't think it's age appropriate for elementary students to be forced to be comfortable in front of a screen. My second point is today the CDC updated their stance with the importance of reopening schools this fall. I don't know if you guys have had the chance to read that, but if you haven't, I really urge you to do so. It has some really great points. My third and final point is I really appreciate the comments regarding reopening when this mandate lifts for our county. My main concern is the board might think it's easy or we're comfortable doing distance learning, and we will continue to do that instead of transitioning into a hybrid model. I feel if it's possible, then we should do everything in our power to get these kids back to in-person learning. And I am very concerned about other schools around us opening and our kids falling behind. With my last 10 seconds here, I just want to thank you guys for all the work you put in. I know it's a very hard job, and a lot of components go into trying to make everybody happy. And so thank you so much for trying your very best and having the best for our kids. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. All right. What do we have? And that has concluded our. All right.
Sorry,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Clark.
So now we are up to. Well, let me take it back to the board. Was there any final comments that the board had before we move on? Are any of my board members on here?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple. If we're just going that, I can just state mine briefly.
Sure.
So appreciate all the comments. I think a lot of important observations and concerns were brought up tonight. I do echo some of the parents on this call about special education, and I know I keep hammering on this, but these kids need, at the very least, should have the option to have some in-person opportunities. It's a small cohort of students, and we can get creative with this. I think someone mentioned outdoor education for these students. I think we can do safe education in person for these students. And I do realize that we are waiting on certain guidelines and guidance. And at this point, the governor's initial order did not really give us a lot of clarity on this point. So I really hope we get something this week or next week so that we can provide more information to our special needs families as soon as possible. But I would just keep stating that. I can't state that enough, that these services just aren't the same online. I think, I think a lot of the concerns that were raised about synchronous learning and not enough asynchronous learning, I think is pretty valid. I realize we're trying to create the classroom experience in the home. And I think a lot of effort has been put into that with these schedules. But I think the reality is that it's not fully doable to a certain degree. I mean, I just keep thinking about my own family. We had, in the spring, which I completely understand was a different situation, but some of the same concerns still exist, where we have 3 kids all with Zoom meetings at the same time, or back to back or whatever it might be. If you have more than one kid, I mean, really making sure you have the internet bandwidth to cover that. Hoping that you have a parent at home who's not working that can help facilitate, these scheduling, your kids getting onto these classes. It's going to be a challenge, and it's a challenge for my family. And we were able to be home to a degree in the spring and maybe in the fall too. So I can't even imagine what it's going to be like for those families that don't have parents at home during the day. And so I really think maybe we do work with our teachers, but see, can we get more asynchronous, flexible learning? Because I think flexibility is going to be really critical for a lot of our families who can't necessarily facilitate 3 or 4 kids, on all these Zoom calls. Maybe they don't have enough devices or enough internet or aren't home. So I definitely think that's something that should be looked at. I think it was brought up a number of times in public comment, but I do appreciate the work that's going on, and I look forward to learning more soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover. Any other final comments from the board?
Mr. Clark?
Ms. Ranking?
2 things. We did hear a lot about changing the school start date. I just wanted to reassure the families and public that our staff is working with our teachers union to come up with the proper amount of professional development time. But at this time, that has not been revolving around changing the start of the school year. So I think we need to just be clear about that right now, that as of right now, the start of the school year remains the same. And also the parent who questioned about having student care. I think we need to address that because if I'm not mistaken, there is no student care, correct? So I think we need to make sure we address that in case we have families who are thinking that that option would be available.
Okay, great. Thank you, ma'am. Any other final comments?
Yes, Mr. President. It just,
yes,
it's like I've been always saying, I have a lot of confidence that we're going to deal with the equity issue. That includes the special education kids, like I was saying several meetings ago, that's unfound, like the autism kids, the kids that are higher at risk. We do need to do as much as we can to get them in-person support, as Mr. Hoover said. But I think we're going to find it. We're waiting on the state. We'll get some guidelines. Hopefully we can do it safely for those parents and those kids, because those are the ones, the kids that need that type of support. So the other thing is hopefully that we'll figure out the digital divide and figure out ways to provide equal access for everyone, that the kids that we're going to be able to do an assessment and do some type of remediation. And hopefully we can bring those kids also first priority in some in-person small one-on-one to get them up to speed, because there's definitely an educational gap there that we have far behind. Also, I just want to say to everybody that the staff has done a tremendous amount of work. I know we're still have to work together with our teachers and our classified and negotiations and what we have to figure out. But like in the past, I've always said, we need to come together as a team, and I'm very confident we're going to think out a win-win situation. Like Mrs. Rankin said, more professional development. It really is going to take a learning curve to learn these new platforms. I heard some concerns about that. So there is definitely a learning curve on that across the board. Also, for the parents and the out there to be totally engaged, we need to provide some type of orientation and training also, and as much information. I heard tonight staff is going to try to do that too. There's a lot to do in 3 weeks. So hopefully we get direction, we get down to implementation, and we get this thing done in a relatively quick way so that we can start with a very good program that has expectations and schedules that the teachers can work from and our students can learn from. But I'm very confident we'll see on August 3rd what more of this stuff will get cleared up, and we'll wait and hear from the county and from the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Short. I wanted to reach out to our student board member real quick before we close out the final comments with the superintendent. Student board member Allie, did you have any final comments?
Yes, I did, just regarding teachers. So I really feel for our teachers right now, and I appreciate all of the comments that were made by teachers. So I just had a couple of questions to think about, I guess, but how are we going to adequately prepare teachers for distance learning? And what types of trainings are going to ensue? And how are we going to alleviate stress that is put on teachers right now? So I guess what I'm kind of really asking for is the timeline of and all of that, because we have so little time right now. And I think it's imperative that we start training teachers right now, just as quickly as we can. So yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to all the teachers, and I feel your pain and I understand where you're coming from. So
thank you, ma'am. And we will close it out with our superintendent, Dr. Collegian.
Thank you, President Clark. And I want to thank all those that submitted comments, either written comments before the meeting or those that shared their comments, with their raised hand during the meeting today. I also want to thank all those that have been working tirelessly since the spring, not taking any breaks. That includes our management, our principals, our teachers, our classified members. And I know it feels like sometimes we're not moving fast enough. and and not enough time in the year. But we are very mindful of that. And by our next meeting, as I'm summarizing some of our next steps, we do have some answers we need back from California Department of Public Health and Sac County Public Health, so we'll be responding to those by our next meeting on August 3rd. We'll be looking at our schedules and bringing forward recommendations for those, more clarity on the synchronous, asynchronous parts of the day, more specificity in meeting the needs of our special ed students and opportunities, child care for our employees, looking at possible days to build in, if possible, for additional professional development for our staff. And some of the other questions that came up tonight, like when will we pick up our materials, our textbooks, will we have to make photocopies? All that are being summarized in our FAQs that'll be coming out too. So I just want to encourage you to have patience. We're going to get there together. And I appreciate everybody's support in this process. I want to thank our students. I know this is still an unsure time for them, and they want as much certainty as they can have too. So Allie, thank you for your leadership and helping message that as you come back to school and work with your student advisory board. So more to come, and a lot of this will be seen in our next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. All right, so we're at item 8B, budget update. Superintendent?
Yes, this information is coming back as an update. It's a discussion item this evening, but the board has requested that we start looking at our budget and how the adopted budget varies from the enacted budget. We did approve our budget on June 18th. So this evening, Ms. Crawford is going to walk us through some of the comparisons, what's changed, what do we know so far of any of the funding that might be coming from state or federal in the times that we're entering in this next school year. So Ms. Crawford, welcome, and I'm going to turn it over for the presentation to you.
Thank you and good evening. Let me share my screen here. Okay. So as Dr. Clayton said, the board had requested some budget updates since we adopted our budget back in June. So this is basically a summary of what has happened on the roller coaster budget time period since January. When we adopted our budget in June, we were following what was part of the May revise. After our budget was adopted, the state then finalized and enacted the state budget, and there was quite a few differences from what the May revise included. The biggest piece of that was the LCFF funding change. Within the May revise, we had a negative 10% reduction that most districts up and down the state were required to build into their budgets. So with the enacted state budget, that basically went away, and we went to a zero COLA. So looking at that COLA, the statutory COLA is actually a 2.31% amount. However, we will not be receiving any funding for a COLA. It's basically zero funded. As part of that, the zero COLA also applies to categorical programs. One piece that is helpful without that 10% reduction, we had anticipated changes to our add-ons for our transportation program and our instructional improvement grants. So those reductions are no longer in play. Again, we usually do not receive a COLA on those funds as a regular funding source, but at least we won't take that reduction. We've heard from quite a few sources, and you read in the newspaper, you hear in the media, that education took no cuts, no hits. Actually, eliminating that COLA really is a reduction for education. We still have ongoing expenditures that we need to pay for, basically, but we don't have the revenue sources to cover those. The employer contributions for PERS and for STIRS Within that enacted budget, there was some rate buy downs. So that was good news for us on both the PERS and the STIR side. On the PERS side, it's almost a 2% reduction from what the rate proposal was for employers. It went from 22.6 to about 20, get a slide there, to about 20.7. And then on the CalSTR side, originally it was 18.4 and it's now 16.15, which is a little more than a 2% reduction. Those rates are still fluctuating for 21-22, but for the 2021 year, those are pretty well set. On the special education side, there will be no COLA applied to any of our special ed resources. However, our base rate will be increased to a $625 per ADA statewide average. We are still waiting for some language in what that calculation looks like. There are pieces for low incidence, our program specialists, some of our regionalized services that were part of the original AB 602 model. So we'll need to see what that funding looks like with the new calculation. For those of you who missed my flying bags of money, they are back in place. So for last year, for 1920, we had one deferral. So the cash that we were expecting in June, actually, we received in July. For 2021, those deferrals now go from one deferral to 5 deferrals. So basically, the last 5 months of the 2021 year, none of that cash will be received by districts. That will all be deferred into the next year. So we will be revising our cash flows. As you can imagine, that will probably have an impact on the amount of cash that we have. So those cash flows are going to be very important. We will be receiving some federal and some state one-time dollars to address our COVID-19 concerns. One of the biggest pots from the Federal CARES Act is the learning loss mitigation funding, and that comes in 3 pieces, basically. There's a piece for students with disabilities. There's a piece for supplemental concentration grant, which follows our ELLI model, and then a smaller piece for LCFF. One thing to remember on these, the receipt of these funds are contingent upon a learning continuity and attendance plan. And I'll talk a little bit about that coming up. That plan has to be adopted by the board before September 30th. And it also has to be in full compliance with our federal requirements. And to top it off, those funds have to be spent by December 30th. So we have a short window of time to get that plan approved and a very short period of time in which to spend it. The purpose of those funds will pretty much follow what's in the learning continuity plan. The major categories are addressing the learning loss or accelerating process or progress to close those learning gaps, looking at ways to extend instructional time or services for our students, providing core academic supports for those students that need it, adding additional instructional materials or supports as needed. And then as we've talked about, making sure that we have the devices and the connectivity for in classroom when we go back and for distance learning. And then in addition to that, there will be additional funds for mental health services to provide professional development, which has come up multiple times tonight, and then to provide for our student nutrition, providing meals for our students as necessary. Another federal funding source is the ESSER funds. We talked a little bit about this at adopted budget. These funds will be allocated in proportion to the way we receive our Title I funds. They are subject to federal equitable services, which is for our private schools. And I believe our learning loss mitigation funds will also be subject to that. We do have to file an application for that funding, which we have submitted. So I'm hopeful that we will receive that fairly soon. And then we did get a small amount from the State General Fund, which is SB 117. Those funds were mainly for the cleaning products, the equipment needed for disinfecting our facilities. It's for our PPE materials that were needed to provide opportunities to get distance learning started and to also maintain in nutritional services. Looking at reopening schools, since we will be opening on the start of the year in a distance learning model, as part of SB 98, there are requirements. Most of these will be addressed in the student schedules, as we saw earlier tonight. Once we get more into the implementation pieces of this, these will all fall into place, and I believe probably 95% of the questions will be answered that have come up tonight. And then along with those distance learning requirements, there are also attendance pieces that go along with that. These are also part of the SB 98 requirements, and these will also be subject to audit. So there are weekly records that must be kept, absence records. There will be outreach and notification to parents if students miss a certain amount of time. There's that outreach to make sure that students are keeping up, and if they're not, reaching out and finding out if they need additional services that we can provide. Now, talking about that learning continuity and attendance plan, these are the 4 major components that are included in that plan. We hope to have the final template from CDE by August 1st. We do have a draft, so we know, at least so far, what is included in these 4 major categories. As I said before, these do have to be approved by the board before September 30th. And the majority of these, again, will be addressed within our student schedules. So it's just a matter of identifying what we're doing and how we're actually implementing. So some of those major pieces, there's a component on stakeholder engagement. So this is just looking at the options that we'll be providing for families, for students to participate in public hearings, participating in any other efforts that we make to get stakeholder feedback on what our learning going forward looks like. There are components in terms of instructional offerings. These are both for in-person and for distance learning. There are pieces that talk about the continuity of instruction, making sure that the curriculum is the same for either in-person or distance, that they are both the same, that there's no differences. There's the pieces that talk about the access to devices and the connectivity. We talked a little bit about that earlier in terms of Chromebooks, making sure our students have the right devices in order to facilitate their learning. And then looking at how do we measure the student participation? How do we continue with assessing their academic process or their progress, measuring what the time value of that student work looks like, what professional development, what type of resources we'll be providing to staff to support that distance learning model. And then the additional supports that we will be using to assist our students with that have unique needs, our special education students, our English learners, our foster youth, our English language, our low-income students. There's also the piece that talks about how do we address the learning loss. We know when school abruptly closed in March, a lot of our students, they fell behind rather quickly. So how do we address that learning loss since March and then even possibly into this new school year? How do we measure that? How do we make sure that what we're offering is effective? We'll also be looking at what mental health services we'll be offering. This kind of goes hand in hand with that outreach. As we're communicating with our students and finding out what additional supports they need, we'll be looking at their social and emotional well-being. What additional resources do they need? We'll also be looking at school nutrition. We will be providing meals for students who are eligible for free and reduced. We know this will look different for the new school year. Our participation more than likely will be lower, but we will continue to provide those meals. We will be looking at increasing and improving students' services for our foster youth, our English learners, and our low-income students. This is very similar to our LCAP process. And then how will we be using that one-time allocations from both the federal and the state government? How are we aligning that funding to our needs? How are we aligning that with our LCAP? How are we aligning that with our ELLI dollars? And how are we showing what those increased or improved services were? On to what we'll be looking at with our revised budget and reduction planning as we are moving forward. So in August, we will present a 45-day budget revision. So for the revenues, we'll be looking at our LCFF revenues, since we'll now have a 0% COLA with no reductions. We'll also be revising our ADA, which will reflect that hold harmless provision that was enacted midway through 1920 and is now going to be effective for 2021. We will be revising our 1920 ADA down slightly lower than what we had projected at adopted budget. Mainly that is for ESY ADA that we are unable to count. And then our 2021 ADA will basically be the same as 1920. So that will also be lower than what we had at adopted budget. And that hold harmless provision also applies to the charter school. So we'll have to revise their ADA as well. They will not be able to show that growth that we're projecting for the charter school. We'll be revising our ELLI funding. We'll have a better estimate of the CARES and the ESSER funding. And then hopefully that estimated special ed funding with the new statewide average. On the expenditure side, we'll be revising those employer contributions for STIRS and for PERS. And then we'll be looking at additional contributions to the charter school, to student care. With student care, those are parent paid services basically, but we still, since we will not be opening our student cares when school starts, but we still have to pay for the employees. So we'll have a contribution for student care. We're looking at our ACEs and our after school program, how we operate those, what services we can offer. There's some conflicting language on how those will operate once school starts, so there will probably be more to come on those. And then we'll also be looking at transportation, since those are also parent paid. As the third interim was approved by SCOE, this was the directive that was included in their approval letter. This is similar to the letters that we received for first interim and second interim. Basically what it says was for adopted budget, they could not approve our budget unless we met the 3% minimum reserve requirement for all years. When we adopted our budget in June, we did not meet that reserve level for 2 of the 3 years. So that is one of the main things that we will be looking at when we revise our budget. So in September, we will actually bring a revised budget to the board, and this is a SCOE requirement. So we will be looking at both revenues and expenditures. We'll be taking the adjustments from that 45-day revision. We'll take any further adjustments for reductions for our facility usage revenues, since there won't be any outside usage. Those parent paid fees, those programs associated with that. We'll have adjustments for staffing once we know better what that looks like when school starts. And then any further program contributions based on some of those revenue sources. And then we will have our cash flow revisions based on those additional apportionment deferrals. We will be updating our multi-year projections. And then we will be providing a budget reduction plan that SCOE is also requiring. As part of that reduction planning, we will continue what we have started in the previous budget study sessions. and some previous board meetings. We will follow our guiding principles of reducing expenditures, minimizing the impacts to students, minimizing potential layoffs, and reviewing all of our programs. Our proposed reductions will be to achieve a balanced budget while at the same time maintaining fiscal solvency. And then we'll be looking at appropriate reserve levels. We need to be a little cautious as we look forward to 21-22 and 22-23. There's a lot of sentiment out there that we kind of dodged a bullet this year. We didn't take those major budget reductions that were proposed in May. We were able to basically push those off. But there's a lot of sentiment that the 21-22 year and 22-23 years will be worse. A lot of tax revenue from this current year won't be actually calculated until next year. So there's lots of thought that maybe those revenues will be much lower for the next fiscal year. Looking at our next steps as we move forward, in August, we will bring the 45-day budget revision. On September 10th, we're going to have a pretty busy meeting. We'll have the revised budget. We'll have the required plan for budget reductions for SCOE. We'll have our unaudited actuals for 19-20. And then we need to have our public hearing for the learning continuity and attendance plan. At the 24th meeting, we will adopt that plan. And then in the fall, going through December, we'll have continued discussion on those budget reductions. We'll be negotiating the impacts of those reductions. We did start zero-based budgeting with some of our departments while we built the 2021 budget. There is more to do on that, so we will continue with that. We will still have an LCAP, it's just a little later this year, along with a budget overview for parents. And then we'll also have the first interim report.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the board?
I've got a couple, Mr. President.
Sure, Mr. Hoover.
So thank you, Rhonda. One of the things that came up a lot in our last discussion, especially in the public comment period,
Student board member? Hearing none, I will go ahead and make my final comments, which will probably be short and sweet since we are kind of getting out of here a little early. But I just wanted to thank the staff for all their hard work. Normally summertime is a time for breaks and time to take vacation with your families. And you're working hard, you're trying to put things together, and we appreciate everything you're doing. I just want you to be cognizant of our working families, our families with special needs, and of course, addressing the digital divide in Rancho Cordova, because that area is just really, they need the help, they need that support, and I'm hoping that we can get the city on board and partner with them. Our teachers, I want to thank you. Many of you have worked the front lines, especially in March when we had this total shutdown. I mean, we had to go to a crisis learning, and we did what we can to make sure that our students succeeded. Now you're challenged with the new challenge of making sure that we get everything together. And I know that many of you all have not taken vacation. Many of you guys have done research online, and I appreciate that, and it's not going unnoticed. So I just want to thank you all for your hard work and just sticking with us and showing some patience. We'll get through this. We just have to work together. Parents, thank you for your phone calls, your emails, and just sharing your concerns. I know that you don't think that the board listens to you, but we do. And we listen to all the parents that may have different views and different ideas. But please understand that we do hear you. And I appreciate you advocating for your kids. I appreciate parents advocating for all the kids in the district. But again, we will get through this and we'll get through it together. I'm an optimist. So with that being said, have a good night. Meeting adjourned.